Hi everybody, welcome to Anglers Covey. We're doing the Umpqua Signature Tyer Tour today. My name is Hans Mylant. I'm a new Umpqua Signature Fly designer. I'm going to go over a pattern that Umpqua recently picked up from myself. It's called Sunny Side Up. It's an egg pattern. What's unique about this pattern is it's built with a Umpqua jig bomb, so it's got a lot of weight to it. It'll always ride hook point up, and it gives you the ability to use an egg fly kind of as an anchor fly, which is something not really available on the market right now, with it still looking like an egg. So this is cool because you can tie it anywhere from right here. We've got a 2.5 millimeter tungsten jig bomb, and it's on a size 20 hook. And you can do it clear up to, this is a size 5 millimeter jig bomb. On a 16 hook, so it would give you massive amounts of weights for any type of application. So let's go ahead and get into it. The hook we're going to be using is the Umpqua Parrot Jig, the XC210BL. This one we're going to do in an 18. We're going to use a 3 millimeter Umpqua jig bomb for this. And then the main ingredient for this fly is going to be Ecstasy Nano. My favorite in particular is this cheese color, but I've had success on chartreuse, pink, orange, all of them really. So let's go ahead and we're gonna get our hook put in the vise here. We want to have that jig bomb so that the recessed area is pointing back, and then I'm just gonna rest that jig bomb on my vise. Now for a thread, I've got Vivis 16-aught in light Cahill, just a light yellow thread. I like the thinner stuff because it gives me the ability to kind of hide my whip finish at the end of the fly. So to start off here, we're going to start our thread on the flat portion of this jig hook. And go ahead and trim your tag. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to build up a thread base here to keep this bead from spinning around the hook shank. So when it falls like that, that's not what I want. I want to put down more thread until I can keep that jig kind of posted on top of that hook shank. Okay, so if it still falls, we're going to add a little bit more here. Okay, see how it's sticking like that? That's when you know you're good. So we want to line it up with the front face of the bead perfectly in line with the jig portion of the hook shank, so just a tad bit further. Okay, sitting right there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to X-wrap the bottom side of this, almost kind of like what you might do with dumbbell eyes. Okay, so I like, for this size, I'm going to do 15. Now I'm going to reverse my thread direction because most of those thread wraps were put on my side of the hook shank. You can see there, not a whole lot on yours. So then I'm going to take my thread, come around the bead, and reverse those X wraps and do another 15. Okay, and then I'm going to put my thread around the bead, and I'm going to do kind of parachute post wraps. We're going to do 15 of these. This is all just adding a thread base to keep that bead from spinning on the hook shank. Okay, and then we'll finish off doing a couple more X wraps on that side, reverse directions, a couple more X wraps on my near side, back around the bead, and then end with your thread behind the bead. Okay, we're going to go ahead and add some super glue at this point to kind of cement everything into place. And I'm okay with getting super glue onto the bead at this point because that's just going to help keep this Ecstasy Nano material secured. You just hit all of the thread on the underside and a little bit of the bead. Okay, now comes our main material for this fly, which is the Ecstasy Nano here. We're going to begin by stripping some of the fibers away from the core so we can get a nice clean, small tie-in point. I'll show you here once I get it stripped. And that wet super glue is going to help so we don't pull this out. Okay, so you can see there, we've got the core exposed. I'm going to anchor that right at the back side of this bead. Give it a good 5 or so anchors. Pop your thread in front, and then you want to put on a half hitch here. With the eye facing downward, if you don't half hitch, your thread can fall off that hook eye and it makes things kind of a pain. Okay, this is the magic part of this flyer. The part that took me the longest to figure out is how to wrap this and get complete coverage on the underside. So I'm going to start by pulling the Ecstasy Nano towards myself. We'll go under the bead, towards the front of the bead, over the hook shank, and then around just the bead. Okay, so that was one series. Then we're going to go down around the hook shank, in front of the bead, over the hook shank, around the bead. Now we're going to continue with this series of wraps until we get full coverage on the underside of the bead here. And it always helps turn, look at the underside of that fly, make sure you're getting good coverage. Okay, very happy with that. Now at this point, I have the material pulling directly towards myself. I'm going to take it straight to the hook eye. So I can pull my thread up and grab that right behind the hook eye there. I'm going to give it 3 or so wraps. Come in front, do a wrap, put another wrap on top, and then I'm going to go ahead and whip finish with this still attached. So we'll whip finish right behind the hook eye here. Just do a 3 turn. I'm going to trim off this Ecstasy Nano now, close as I can. Okay, we're going to put another whip in here, but prior to that, I'm going to use my fingernails to push this Ecstasy Nano towards the bead from the rear side. Okay, and then I'm going to use my fingernails to push my whip finish up kind of into that Ecstasy Nano. It'll kind of help solidify that nice round egg shape we're looking for here. Okay, tuck that up in there with your fingernails. And at this point, we're going to throw in one last whip finish just to make sure everything stays where we put it. Nice 4-turn whip. And then trim off your thread. And that's what I like to call the sunny side up. You can see it kind of has that look like egg after you cooked it sunny side up. It'll always ride hook point up, and most often I'm hooking fish right in the beak with this thing. So it's proven to be a very successful pattern for me. You can tie it in all sorts of different bead colors and Ecstasy Nano colors, and all sorts of different weights as well. So give that a shot, and I hope you find some success with it. Thank you, guys.
What size was that?
That was so I'll throw it back up here. This is a size 18 hook. The Umpqua XC210BL, that pair to jig hook, and paired with a 3mm bead. If I do a 2.5mm bead, I'll put that on the 18, or I'm sorry, on the size 20 hook. If I do a 3.5mm bead, I stick to the 18. If I start bumping up to like 4 or 5mm beads, I'll put those on the 16. Just give yourself a little bit of hook gap. The nice thing is you don't impede any of the hook gap with this, which tends to happen a lot with egg patterns as well. Okay, for the next fly, we're going to do one of my most productive patterns last year. It's not a pattern I invented, I just did very well on. It's a soft hackle CDC Frenchie. So we're going to do this. We're going to use the XC210BL pair to jig hook again. We're going to use the 16 for this. This has worked very well for me on a hopper dropper setup, especially once the PMDs start popping. We're going to use a gold Umpqua jig bomb. This again is going to be a 3mm jig bomb. I'm going to place this bead on the hook in the reverse direction. So I have, if you look at the bead, hopefully you can see there's a recessed section of that bead. I have the recess pointed towards the hook eye. That's going to allow this bead to kind of rock forward a little bit and almost makes the fly ride a little more horizontal, like a balanced fly would. For a thread, we're going to use Uni-thread 8/0 in the Fire Orange. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just get the thread started on the hook shank here, and we're going to build up a thread base behind that bead to keep the bead into place, okay? So you'll see it sitting on the underside. I'm going to start bumping it with my thread. It's going to pull it up. I'm going to hold it there slightly with my finger until I can get it to not roll around that hook shank anymore. Okay, so just build a little thread base, just like that. For the tail on this fly, we're going to use some microfibbits, the barred microfibbits from MFC. I like these because they're really durable. They tend to last a lot longer than synthetic tails. So I'm going to use 2 fibers from the microfibets here. I'm going to measure to get a tail about the length of the hook shank. I'm going to do a pinch wrap. So I'm going to hold that where I want it, pinch my thread, secure that stuff to the top of the hook shank. At this point, I can make sure I'm happy with the length of my tail. I like that, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap that all the way down to the bend of the hook. I don't need to cover everything here because this will all be covered with pheasant tail. Okay, we'll go ahead and trim these butts. And then we're going to add some wire. So we're going in with some small copper wire here. Get a little bit more than that. Here we go. Okay, now I'm going to counter wrap the pheasant tail with the wire. So I'm deciding beforehand that I'm going to wrap the pheasant tail in a clockwise manner, which means I'm going to wrap the wire in a counterclockwise manner. So I'm going to position the wire on my side of the hook shank. If I was to position it on the far side of the hook shank, when I take that first wrap, it can often kick that tail off to the side, and I don't want that. So I'm going to secure in my copper wire here all the way up till the tag's right behind the bead. Okay. And then we're going to add in the pheasant tail material. I'm going to get about 5 or 6 fibers here. You don't want to go too overboard because we still want to keep this thin. Okay, I'm going to snip the tips off just so I have nice even flush to tie in. I'm going to grab this right on top of the hook shank, wrap back till I reach my tail, and then move my thread forward. Okay, now we're going to wrap the pheasant tail up the hook shank. Just passing off one wrap to the next. Trying to get complete coverage. We don't want any of the orange underbody showing through. Once we get up to the bead, I'll pull the material straight up, put my thread on the back side of it to capture it. Do 3 good wraps. I'll put one in front, one on top, and another one in front, and then I can trim off my pheasant tail. Now I'm going to wrap the copper wire the opposite direction, so I'm going to start towards myself. I'm under the hook shank. Do open spiral wraps. We're going to get 5 or so. There's 3, 4, 5, and then I'm going to pull that down and pull my thread up and over that wire. Then I'll go in front of it, then go over it and in front of it, and then one more time. Now I'm going to support the hook shank while I helicopter the wire off. Okay, try to so you guys can see still here. Okay, the next step is we're going to add a tiny little bit of some ice dubbing here. This is the UV shrimp pink. We're going to add this twice. So we're going to put a little bit behind our little thread hotspot, if you will. That's going to build up a bump for our CDC. And then we're going to add a little bit after we get the CDC on. So we're looking for a pretty sparse amount here of this dubbing. And dub it nice and tight. Okay, so I'm going to put this, like I said, I want to leave a little bit of room between the bead and the dubbing right now because that's where I'm going to put my CDC. Now we're going to come in with the hairline CDC. Now, not all CDC is created equally, and the Swiss CDC stuff is awesome for dry flies, but it's a little too bulky for me for nymphs. I'm looking for sparseness here, for movement, not floatability. So this, for lack of a better term, crappy CDC is perfect for this application. Okay, so I'm going to grab it by the tip and stroke the fibers rearward so I can get a fairly clean tie-in point. I'm going to snip off the tip here. I'm going to use that section to tie in. Okay, get a nice. Now you want to make sure you get some good wraps on this so it doesn't pull out on you, because that can be frustrating. And now I'm looking for 1, maybe 2 wraps of this CDC. So I'm just going to. We got 1 there. we'll go with another one, and then pull the feather straight up. Bring your thread over top and grab that feather. 3 solid wraps, preen everything rearward so you can get a wrap in front. We'll come in and we'll snip off the stem of that CDC feather now. Okay, see how sparse that is? That's exactly what we're looking for. A little bit of movement, okay? And then we're gonna go back to that dubbing. So we've got the ice dubbing, the UV shrimp pink here. Fairly sparse amount. We don't want to be building bulk. We're adding kind of a little hot spot here. Okay, and we're going to use that just to keep this CDC preened rearward. So get a few good wraps of that. Everything looks great. From here, the last step is to add a little hot spot behind the bead. I'm just going to do that with a series of 2 mini whip finishes, if you will. So I'll just whip finish 4 times or so, and then I'll take a look and see how it looks. I want a little bit more on my hot spot, so I'll do another 4-turn whip finish. Pull my thread down to secure that knot. Then you can trim off your tag. And that is the Soft Tackle CDC Frenchie. I had a ton of luck on this last year, both as kind of a lead fly on an indicator rig, as an anchor fly on a Euro rig, and as a dropper on a hopper dropper setup. So time in all sorts of different sizes. 2.5, 3, and 3.5 mil are my most common use sizes. Thank you guys. Thank you. Okay, we've got one more I'd like to go over with you guys today. This is a pattern by a gentleman named Gary Glenn Young. He's on the national team for South Africa, and it's called The Gun. Not a whole lot of people have heard of this as far as I know. And when he talks about the fly, he talks about being on the river, discussing it with his friends, and his friend told him, man, you've got every trigger imaginable in that fly. And so thus, The Gun. So kind of a cool way the name came about. We're going to do this. It's going to represent kind of like either a larger mayfly or a smaller stonefly. So this is going to be on the XC400 from Umpqua, their X series hooks. This is a size 14. We're going to do this with a 3.5 millimeter silver jig bomb. And again, I'm going to put the point through the recessed side of the jig bomb, which is going to allow that bead to rock in front of the hook eye, as you can see here, which kind of just, like I said, almost rides like a balanced fly in the water. For a thread, we're going to use white, and that's really because we're going to color it and look for a lighter belly on this fly. So I've got 8/0 white uni thread here. Okay, so we'll get that bead up towards the hook eye. We're going to go ahead and start our thread behind it. I'm going to put my finger here to keep it from spinning around. Just lay down some thread till I get it to sit where I want it. And once it's kind of secured, I'm good to proceed with the rest of the fly. So we got enough thread there. It's going to keep that bead right in place. Okay, the tail on this fly is going to be daddy long legs, which is a very, very fine rubber leg. It's going to give a ton of movement to this fly. This is kind of what the stuff looks like. Get a piece here. Okay, so I'm going to wrap the daddy long legs around my thread. Pull my thread up, move this to on top of the hook shank, and then start securing down the hook shank. Making sure those daddy long legs are on top. Right down to about the bend of the hook. Okay. Now we're going to trim these, but you want these things longer than you'd think. Okay, you can always use something and trim them on the river too. So we're going to go about 1.5 times the length of the shank of the hook there. And then we're going to build up small little spot at the back here with some, we're going to take a fluorescent green or chartreuse Sharpie. And I'm going to color my thread. I'm going to put a little tiny spot, hot spot right at the butt of this fly. One of our triggers, right? We already added one trigger, that's movement. That's that daddy long legs. This is trigger number 2, which is going to be a fluorescent hot spot. So we're just going to build up a little bit of this hot spot right at the base of the tail here. Okay, and it can have a little bump too. That'll look great. Okay, and then we'll walk our thread forward. Now we're going to use some size small silver wire for ribbing. Okay, I'm going to secure this to the far side of the hook shank. I'm not worried about counter ribbing this time because I don't have a material that I need to protect like I did with the Frenchie. We're just going to secure this down to that hot spot, not on top of it. And then we're going to come in with some large flat tinsel. This is one of our other triggers. This is going to add some flash to the fly. We'll come in with a little bit of this. And I'm going to secure this with my thread. I'm using large because it's going to give me the size wing case that I want. You could wrap the body with small or medium and then switch to large for a wing case, but it works just as well just starting with the large. So I'll secure that to the hook shank here. I want to make sure I have a fairly decent thread body because the white is going to be my belly of this fly, the lighter belly. Okay, and then we're going to wrap the tinsel forward. So you'll see how it kind of folds on itself. I can give it a bit of a tug. It'll wrap nice and flat and smooth. Okay, once I get up behind the bead, I'm going to pull that straight up, grab it with my thread a couple times, and I'm going to let it hang forward while I wrap my wire. Now, right before I go with the wire, I'm going to get a black Sharpie and color just the top of this fly. It's going to give it a darker back. You can color the sides a tad too. We're really looking to keep that belly light though. Make sure you don't hit the green and color up your hot spot at the rear end of this fly. Okay, now we're going to take that wire. We're going to open spiral wrap the wire up the hook shank. Till we get to where our thread is. Pull straight up. Bring your bobbin over with a couple loose wraps. Then I'm going to come in front of it with some tight anchoring wraps. And then I can helicopter that wire off. So I'm just going to support the hook shank with my fingers. Pull on the thread to give it a little tension. Helicopter that wire off. Now I'm going to fold my tinsel rearward. Put a couple wraps on it, keeping it pinned on top of the hook shank here. We're going to add our last set of legs. So we're going to get those daddy long legs again. And we're going to put a section on each side of the hook shank. So the easiest way I've found to do this is if I take this material and stick it between the thread and the vise, I can grab it on the far side of the vise and then pull it up and around under the thread to secure it on the far side of the hook shank, like you see there. Or my near side, your far side. And then I'll grab another piece, and we're going to put that on far side of the hook shank for me, closer to you. Right there. Okay, perfect. And then we're going to walk our thread back to the base of that wing case material and come in with a little bit of dubbing. This is some black peacock ice dub. I'm going to try to dub it very fine. I'm not looking to make legs with this because I already have my legs with the daddy long leg material. I'm looking to cover all of that white thread though and add a little bit of thickness behind the bead so we don't have such a steep drop off. So I'm going to put that between these legs, making sure I'm covering all of my white thread. Walk forward. I'm going to pull the front legs rearward now and put my last couple reps of dubbing right behind the bead in front of those legs. I'll come with this flashback material now and fold it over. Make sure you don't trap your legs when you go to tie this down, so I'm going to sweep those back, come over top, and make sure I secure that nice and evenly. So I'll put 2 wraps right on top of the flashback. I'm going to come up here and snip it off with my scissors nice and close. And then we're going back to the black Sharpie here. We're going to color the thread black so that it's not white right behind that bead. Okay, and then with this whip finish, because those legs are pointing forward in my way, I'm going to kind of start the whip finish. I'll balance the thread on my pinky so that I can manipulate those legs with my index and my thumb to get them out of the way. So I'll get the whip started, balance on my pinky so I can pull these out of the way, and then work my whip finish up right behind the bead here. So we've got a 3-turn whip. We'll go for one more 3-turn whip, tighten. Then we can trim our thread here. And we want these legs longer than you would typically think. So I'm looking for like about the length of the body. Now you can attempt to trim them all at once or do separately. If you want to trim them all at once, just pull these upward and make sure you're not stretching them, because then they're going to bounce back. Trim them all at the same time. And that'll give you a pattern called the gun. He also ties this in a brown coloration with a orange hot spot at the end, but you can see we have a dark back, a nice light belly, all sorts of movement from these rubber legs. You can see when I blow on them, they move crazy. It's got a fluorescent hot spot, it's got flash, all those triggers, and that's why he named it the gun. And that's everything I have for you guys. Thank you for coming out today. If you have any questions, I'll be around Anglers Covey. Thank you, everybody at home, for tuning in. If you have questions, put them in the comments below. We'll get to them the best we can. Stick around for our next tires. Oh, we're doing the round table next, and then we'll have some more tires for you guys. All right?
And then we got Hans bringing up the rear. So you guys just have to share with John a little bit here. But, it should be worked out.
Cool. Thanks, Dave.
So you should introduce it for the live stream.
Live stream.
We're good? So say hi to the live stream.
How's it going, anglers? Landon Mayer here. Great to be a part of this event. The film and fly tying tours that come up in the spring are pretty special, and for me it's a great chance to come out and see all the familiar faces, new faces, and get back in this great sport of fly fishing and the addiction which we all know as fly tying, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. So we're going to do, I think, some Q&As up here, and then after we get these started, I'm going to duck out a little bit early because I'm going to go to a pool party, take a little swim, do a little dip, enjoy this fun weather. But if there's any other questions or anything that we can answer for anybody today, I'm happy to do it and be alongside these great gentlemen and the Anglers Covey. Thanks for the support, and Umpqua Feather Merchants. It's great to be a part of the family.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, so if anybody has fly tying questions, you're welcome to just raise your hand, blurt them out, however you want to do it. I think Sam's going to man any online comments, so we'll just kind of kick it off. Does anybody have any questions?
Get this party started.
How often do you tie your own flies versus flies that you can buy or other tyers, and why?
That's a good one.
That's a real good one. I think we all have varied answers there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tie a whole bunch of other people's patterns all the time. I've been tying a lot over the past 10 years, and I have a huge backstock of flies, so I really don't purchase flies unless I maybe have a specific bug I might need for a trip. But I probably bought 20 flies last year and tied everything else.
Yeah, I think I like to get creative at the bench, so sometimes I'll sit down with no plan and just create stuff. I think that's one of the funnest things of fly tying. I probably tie, I'd say 90% of my flies. I do not tie size 26 parachute Adams.
Those are the 20.
We leave it for Ed Engel.
Yeah, amen to that.
At Atlanta's size 32.
Holy cow.
I love tying my own bugs. You'll find me oftentimes in the shop buying flies. I'm not afraid to admit that. Can't keep enough stock as far as guide trips are concerned. My mentor is John Barr, and one thing I admired about John coming up as an angler and learning in this sport is that literally when he opened his fly box, all of his flies were the flies that he fished and used. So for me, it's important to design and develop flies you have confidence in. So I would say probably 75% are the flies that I use and tie. Maybe the rest of them would be a split between tying those bugs and then racing into the shop and calling them last minute and be like, guys, can you give me a dozen? Just put it behind the counter. I'll move fast, I promise.
Yeah, time of the year definitely
Yep.
swings that for sure. I think in this time of year, 100% tie it all.
Yeah.
July, yeah, that number's not 100%. So.
You look at dry flies differently.
Yes.
Amen.
For sure. Any other questions,
Yep.
anybody in the room?
Very basic question.
Sure.
Yeah.
How do you know which way to twist your thread?
So for everybody at home, she asked, how do you know which way to spin your bobbin?
Good question.
So it depends. If you want the thread to jump rearward, you want to spin the bobbin counterclockwise. If you want the thread to jump towards the eye of the hook, you spin the bobbin clockwise. As you're tying, if you're right-handed, the bobbin is going to naturally put clockwise spins in it. So if you want to flatten out your thread, you spin it counterclockwise till you get it nice and flat.
Exactly, yeah. That's the most common, I think, too.
Perfect.
Moving towards, great answer. Moving towards the eye of the hook. So the direction of the material moving, or the thread moving on the hook shank, is how you twist it. And that's perfect answer. Yep.
That was a great question.
Yeah,
that was an
great
awesome
question.
Any questions? You
How
get
many
questions.
boxes of flies do you have that you're not using?
How many? He asked, how many boxes of flies do you have that you're not using? I have.
Honest answer.
Yeah, honestly, I have at least 12 boxes of flies that rarely see the light of day that are basically full.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I'm always in search for that next pack that can fit everything that I don't need. But yeah, I'd say that's probably a good number too. More, I have way more boxes than I ever fish with, so.
Yeah.
Could be hundreds. What happens is you go out on a trip, like, you know, your favorite saltwater location or freshwater, and you tie 100 flies and you fish one, and you come back with that box that's filled,
Yeah.
and then you just put it in a bag. I do try to downsize the amount of flies I fish, and what I do is categorize them to where I'm fishing a season instead of just always fishing the hatch. So a lot of the boxes I would carry daily on trips in the past could be anywhere from 7 to 10 boxes in a fanny pack, and I've downsized that to 4 boxes now. Yeah, less is more for sure.
And all of those boxes don't have flies that I use all the time. I have several boxes full of things that I thought were great ideas and turned out looking completely ugly. And those are the flies I give to my friends when we go out and fish.
You re-gift those.
Yes, sir.
Good.
Yeah.
How do you organize your fly boxes? By color, by size, by type? or
So
design?
for everybody at home, he asked, how do you organize your fly boxes?
I do mine by discipline. So streamers, dry flies, nymphs, and then as far as the category for each, it'll be based on hatches. Unless it's a shoulder season, then I'll do attractors. So I have at any given time a hatch matching box and an attractor box because I think you need both.
Yeah, and I do it a little bit differently. I like to keep all my midges together, all my betas together, all my stoneflies, caddis, stuff like that. And then my dry flies too, like hatch specific bugs, I keep separate from hoppers and attractor patterns. But I also like to work out of a couple boxes where I can jam up a combination of those to, like Landon said, to kind of minimize things and not have to carry around 30 pounds in my packs.
It's so much easier to find them.
Yeah, where is that?
I do a lot of tight line or Euro nymphing. So I have 4 main boxes that I carry on me. One box will be all my bead head, which is all my anchors. And I have that one organized by species and then finer within that by weight, so by bead size. Then I have another box with all beadless nymphs, so kind of your really small stuff. I'll have a dry fly box that's going to hold my smaller dry flies, and a dry fly box for larger terrestrials like hoppers.
That's great. That's a great question. And I'm going to jump on one more, and then I'm going to be diving into pool soon.
I just wanted to add though, there's really no right or wrong way to do it. Do it how it makes sense to you, how you can work out of your boxes more efficiently. That would be the biggest advice.
Totally.
Something that's easy for you to navigate through and work out of.
And that way you don't miss, too. The key there is to not miss an opportunity.
Yeah.
So if you've forgotten about a fly, which we all do, or if you have confidence in a specific fly that worked, like let's say last year I ended up finding an emerger that worked awesome during the betas hatch. If I've forgotten about that fly because it's not visible, you want to make sure that everything's visible so when you pull it open, that opportunity is there.
Absolutely.
Good point.
Who else do we got? Yeah. You? Yeah.
Back to tying forward wraps versus reverse wraps. What's the strategy on that? I tend to go forward most of the time, but when is it that you need to go back?
For me, it's just if I need to undo something that I may have done wrong. That's the only time I'm wrapping backwards. There's no right or wrong way how to do it. We have a guy in the shop here who wraps towards himself when he ties his flies, and he does just fine doing that. I wrap over the hook shank away from myself, under the hook shank towards myself, and if I wrap reverse, it's only ever to take wraps off to remove a material or fix a mess up or something of that nature.
Yeah, and with thread, I like to alternate. So if I'm building a fly with wire ribbing, I'm going to do forward wraps on my thread, and then I'm going to do reverse wraps with the materials.
Oh, okay.
So I can kind
must
of
have misunderstood.
skip between those. Say I was doing a fly with ribbing and wire, I'd forward wrap all the thread, wrap the wire the other way, and then the rib forward wrap. So
Yeah. Gives you better segmentation. The fibers flare differently when you reverse wrap your thread or you wire it, and then you can do the same with thread as well. So if you're not wrapping wire, you can reverse wrap. Awesome.
yeah.
I misunderstood you.
But back wrapping is important too. So definitely the system as far as having control for every wrap of thread and every wrap of material. You want to be able to back wrap effectively in case you need to make an adjustment.
Absolutely.
Bet.
Russ?
From the internet, someone asked about your purple-winged midge. You fish that all year round?
Yeah, the purple blindside midge. I'm super stoked on the blindside midge. It's my first pattern to come out with Umpqua, so thank you, Umpqua. The blindside midge has been a cult classic kind of around here for a while. I actually will fish that year round, but where I really like that purple color is in the spring. So kind of coming up late winter into the spring, that's when I do best with that purple one. And the purple's a good color too, just to keep in mind if you're on a fishery that the fish are being kind of butt heads about it. That's usually a fly that I could throw at them and get them to eat. So yeah, that's for the most part, that's where I focus on that color.
Yeah, I think for wings too, it's important to have that rainbow effect, the glare, if you will, coming off the wing of a midge. Specifically, I find that purple is the best match to that in comparison to other crystal flash materials. And for midges, it's important because the wing is the length or extending longer than the body, so it's oversized. On other imitations, if you have a tuft coming out, it can be smaller, but a long, oversized wing that represents the color that sheens or shines the way that trout see it can be very important. All right, thank you again, Umpqua. Thank you so much, guys. Love you like family. Covey, everything you guys do, man, appreciate it for sure. Good job today and everything.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Landon.
everybody, for all your support. This isn't possible without all of you, and I'm going to go dive in a pool and enjoy the afternoon in the warm weather. So I appreciate you all.
All right.
Thanks.
Hopefully the pool's outside. We got a pool right out there.
It's 37 degrees. Checked it yesterday.
There was another question online about favorite knots for rigging.
I kind of fell really hard for the Davy knot because it's so small, so quick to tie, and it's proven to be extremely strong for me. So I would say probably 99% of the time when I'm attaching a fly, I'm using the Davy knot or a double Davy knot.
Yeah, I like the Davy knot too, especially for really small patterns. I use the clinch knot a fair amount as well. My connection knot, my leader system to my tippet. I'll do a kind of an even mix. I'll do blood knots and triple surgeons. I have good luck with both of them. It just kind of depends where I'm at, where my mindset is. But with knots, you want to have confidence in them, right? So if you're new to knots, play with all of them. Use the knots that work best for you. But I'd probably say, yeah, the double Davy for a connection knot is hard to beat.
Yeah, and you just need to make sure you're tying that knot right, because if you tie that thing wrong, it'll slip and you'll get really frustrated. So look up some videos or come and ask us and we'll be able to help you get that thing dialed in.
Do you prefer to tie simple patterns or more complex patterns?
Really good question.
That is a very good question. I tie a lot, not just for the fact of making flies to go fish with. I tie a lot, like sometimes I'll tie artsy flies, or I'll tie a fly that doesn't even have a hook on it, kind of like a display fly that I have hanging from my mirror. So I guess it depends what kind of mood I'm in. I do a lot of tying just for the fun of it, so I might do something super complicated that looks really cool so I could take a cool picture of it. But if I'm trying to beast out flies for a trip, I'm going to go as quick and as simple as possible.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the longer I fish, the longer I'm around, the more convinced I am that we as anglers and as fly tyers, oftentimes we overthink things massively. So I like to go, Landon has a great statement that he always says about guide flies, right? They're reliable, they're easy to tie, they're quick to tie, and they're nail drivers. They're gonna catch a lot of fish. So I tend to I like to stay in that lane a lot, and a lot of my flies, when I'm designing them, are basically built from that idea. Pretty easy to tie, really effective and simple. You can take, for instance, the Taylor River, the catch and release section of the Taylor River is a very good example of this. If you take flies over there with a bunch of flash and and crazy bling on those flies, the fish really they'll ignore it. If you throw a plain Jane pheasant tail, no flash, nothing like that, they're on it. So I think less is more in that regard too. But I have to agree with Hans. I think I get a little bit more complex when I'm tying streamers or bigger stuff like that, bigger terrestrial patterns, for sure.
Yeah. Vince.
I've been reading your blog that has the tying spaces on there, and I was wondering if you guys had any comments about tips and techniques for setting up your fly tying area.
The biggest thing, and I mean, sometimes if you look at my desk, you might call me a hypocrite for saying this, but staying organized is really important. My lovely wife bought me an awesome tying table that's a roll top desk. So I kind of got a little overboard when it comes to organization. I guess I keep all of my synthetic materials on the left side of the desk and all of my natural materials on the right side. And then floatier stuff is going to be higher up in the desk, and stuff that I'm going to use for nymphs is going to be lower in the desk, just because that's where you kind of find them within the water column, I guess, the bugs themselves. So oftentimes I will get in like a tying spree and stuff gets just thrown on the desk. But when I go back and clean things up and organize, I try to stick to synthetics on the left, naturals on the right, so that I can get what I want as soon as I know what I want.
Talk about how you set up hooks and beads in your tying environment, please.
I use, I didn't let you get to the last one, but I use one of those pill organizers for old people or anybody that needs pills, I guess. So it says, I've got 4 weeks on it. It says Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I just kind of rubbed that stuff off with alcohol pad, and I put my hooks in there. So I'll just put the numbers in there, and I'll have jig hooks in one area and then non-jig hooks in another area, and then beads of all sorts of different sizes. But I keep all the colors of the beads together because it's too hard to organize color and size. So I keep all 2.5 millimeter beads together, and I might have black, orange, silver, green, purple all in there, and I'll just go in there to pick the color that I want at that time. Same with 3 mil, 3.5 mil, 4 mil. I keep all of the same size beads together, and all different colors are in the same thing, so I can go pick what color I want.
So you take
Yeah.
all your hooks out of the plastic boxes or the sleeves?
Yeah, I take them out of that immediately and dump it in that pill organizer. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, your fly tying space is going to be a lot like your fly boxes, right? Like, have it make sense to you. Be able to work out of it effectively, where you're not looking for everything. I'll jump to Vince's question and I'll piggyback on that. But my fly tying space is akin to a bomb going off. But I will clean it up fairly, I don't know, frequently, I guess. But again, a lot of that chaos makes sense to me. So if I'm tying a bunch of patterns and I have materials laid all over the place, I can just step away and then step back in the next day, and I know where everything is. Knowing
right up.
where everything is kind of the key there. And to piggyback on Hans, yeah, some sort of organization system. I have all my hooks are separated by style, size, and I have a bunch of little plastic containers. I do the same thing with beads. They're like microfilm canisters, and just fill them with beads. I do the same thing as Hans. I put all the same size beads in the containers, and then I can pick through them if I need a different color.
Great question.
Yeah.
What else do we have?
Are there some flies you refuse to tie and you'll buy instead?
Size 26 parachute Adams. I'll dink around with hoppers and stuff like that, even though they're more time consuming. I'm okay with that. I am not a fan of tying tiny, tiny, tiny dry flies.
What he said.
What did we have about, Sam?
We have a question from Europe.
Okay, from Europe.
From Austria. Most rivers in Europe, you're not allowed to fish with split shot.
Yeah.
What would your recommendations be for weighted midges in a similar role?
So I've played around with this with like Euro nymphing, and what I tend to do is put on a big honkin' bead, whatever size I think I need, and then right behind the bead, I'll just tie like a mercury zebra midge. And I'll just fish it and basically pretend the bead's not there. And I've had decent success catching fish on midge patterns, and it's like I'll put on maybe a matte black bead or something to not get attention, and then right behind the matte black bead, put a mercury bead, and then just black thread and silver wire. And that'll cover my midge and also give me the weight I need to get down. Does it look like a midge really looks? Kind of maybe, but seems to be effective.
Yeah, or you could, you know, tie a fly, your bottom fly, with a ton of weight, and then fish those unbeaded flies up above it.
Absolutely.
That's what I would do. Even if it's a bug that's not in that system, you could make some big gnarly 5mm beaded fly, and it's going to do the job.
Yep, and put those smaller ones without beads on dropper tags or behind that guy. Yeah, that's absolutely the way I would go about it. Bob, were you saying something on thread?
Yeah, I've got a spool holder that holds about 50 spools, I guess, and it's not big enough. They're stacked up too high on there. You just buy those great big tall ones that hold 100 spools, or?
I bought 4 of the things that you can get at Hobby Lobby that you screw into the wall, and I keep wire on one, keep other spooled things on another, like your Paragon body flash kind of stuff. And then, I mean, I've got that, and I've got a spool safe that's full of thread, and I've got other things full of thread. I feel you, buddy. Is there a best way to go about it? Not sure, but those little spool holders you can get from Hobby Lobby seem to work pretty well.
I would agree. I love those things.
Yeah.
How often are you changing flies when you're out fishing?
This seems to be a question that we get a lot as guides and obviously people in a fly shop. How often am I changing flies? This is a cool question. Not as often as you might think. First off, if I'm fairly confident in the fishery that I'm on, I've been on it a lot, I kind of know the system there, what times of year, what bugs are active. There's a whole bunch of confidence patterns that I have. And I don't really vary from those too much. I will tell you this, you want to change your depth and your weight way more than you change your flies. So if you're fishing, you know, if you're fishing an RS2 in the state of Colorado and you're not catching fish, I wouldn't change the fly. I would definitely look at the depth and weight. So I always start there, and I always urge people to start there with, especially nymphing, right? Dry flies is a little bit different. If they're denying my dry fly, that's a fun game we all play, right? Like you just keep sizing down and they still won't eat it. That's actually something we're all focused on, a high emerger, not even an adult fly. And that's usually the answer to that puzzle for me.
I guess for me that would depend on if I was out pleasure fishing or if I was out with a client. When I'm out fishing by myself, I often am a bit stubborn, and I'm like, I'll just force feed these flies to fish. I don't feel like changing my flies, right? Which works out often enough, but sometimes doesn't work out so well. If I'm out with a client, I'll change flies a lot more often, and that's just because it's harder for me to tell, you know, maybe their drift is slightly off, or maybe I can, if I'm changing flies a lot, it kind of shows them I'm working, we're trying to figure something out, trying to find what bugs these fish are going to be keyed in on. Whereas when I'm by myself, I'm like, no, I know the fish will eat these flies. I just got to go find different fish.
Force feed. I love it.
Anybody else? Yeah, Sam.
Fluoro or nylon, and why?
Fluoro or nylon, and why? Fluoro for a vast majority of everything I do. Nymphing, 100% fluoro. I might have a butt section of a leader that's nylon, but fluoro, if I'm dry fly fishing, I'll often fish just a nylon leader and have the last foot or so of tippet still be fluoro. And sometimes that'll allow it to sink right under the meniscus, you know, in the surface tension of the water. And if you ever look at your tippet floating on top of the water in very shallow water, you can see a shadow. And if you can get that tippet to sink ever so slightly under the water, it'll omit that shadow. So vast majority of everything I do is going to be fluorocarbon. If I'm going out fishing hoppers, then I'll just fish nylon straight to the hopper and then fluorocarbon to a dropper kind of deal.
Exactly the same. If it's subsurface, it's fluorocarbon 100%. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not in that debate. I'm not going to say, you know, fluorocarbon's more abrasion resistant. I trust it. That's the thing with a lot of things in fly fishing. Like I fish that way. I believe in it. I trust it. I do think fluorocarbon is a little bit stronger. It can take a little bit more of a beating, so it's perfect for anything subsurface. But again, you kind of want to figure out what works for you. Definitely, that's what all of this is really about.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bob.
How long do you tie your Euro setups? I mean, coming off of your...
How long of a leader am I fishing from Euro line to flies?
No,
Your droppers?
from
or-
the dropper, I mean, from the...
Distance between flies.
Yeah.
Okay. Pretty much the same as when I'm doing regular indicator nymphing. This is what I tell people in the 101 class. 1 foot is too short, 2 feet is too long. So somewhere in between there, and you're good.
Yep.
And what about the length of dropper?
Oh, the dropper tag itself, 4 to 6 inches, no more than 6 ever, because I get way too much line wrap. And I see a lot of videos. Some people will have 12-inch dropper tags, and if that works for them, that's great. I don't like those long dropper tags because they wrap around your main line a lot. I feel like if I do 6 inches max, I'm good to go. And I don't tend to change those flies a ton, but if you do and you learn the Davy knot, I mean, you can get a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 inch tag, so you can get several fly changes off of that. Who else? Anyone else?
Squirmy worm or San Juan?
Squirmy all day. No questions asked. John?
San Juan all day. No questions asked.
But only squirmy with a bead. I will never fish a squirmy sans bead. Yeah.
When you're like kind of working on a new fly, how do you pick your hook? There's so many and there's the variations so much there. How do you go
You
about
can start.
That's a really good question. First, I think I would focus on what bug I'm trying to imitate, and then go from there. I think Umpqua does a great job with all their variety of hooks. They have a ton of different hooks out there. So most of the stuff that I fish could honestly be tied on 2 or 3 hooks. Sometimes I'll venture outside of that just to play with some different shapes and sizes. But for the most part, I'll focus on what I'm trying to imitate first and then go from there. Your midges and betas and stuff like that can be on a straight shank or a curved shank hook, and there's a lot of those out there. So I would start there. What are you trying to imitate, and then go from there. What hook shape is best going to imitate the shape of that insect?
Couldn't agree more with John on that. When I'm selecting a hook, first thing I'm doing is what's the shape of the fly that I'm trying to tie. So basically, am I looking for a curved shank hook or a straight shank hook, or is it going to be a jig fly? And then from there, I'm looking at the strength of the hook. So like most of the time, you have a 2488 and a 2488H. If I can use the H, I basically always use the H, just because I don't want any chance of that hook potentially bending out. And sometimes, you know, your Euro nymph, and you can really do those Bassmaster hook sets and get away with it because you have that nice soft tip. So yeah, I'm looking at hook strength, I guess, secondly, compared to shape and size of the hook based on the fly that I'm going to tie.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point.
Anybody else? Yeah, Bob.
All right. Was it you that was telling me you were working on a list to help us figure out standardization on hook sizes between vendors?
No, I did not.
Oh,
I told you that there is no standardization in hook size between vendors, and you just got to look at the hook and take it for what it is.
so a 22 should probably be, what, about a little over 1/8 of an inch long, maybe? I mean, that's the issue. You look
Well,
at-
that's the thing you get to too, is you're going to get 2x long and 3x long shanks, which is going to change all of that, right? And then you have a lot of hook shanks that are 2x short. So, you know, when it comes to, I just don't think there's a way to feasibly do it unless someone was to put out, these are the standards, but then who's to tell the company that they have to abide by those standards, you know? So I don't think there's a fix for it, in my personal opinion.
Don't even look at the label. Just turn the box over, look at the hook itself.
Look at the hook, and if it looks like it's about the size of the fly you want to tie, yeah. Or go to your local fly shop and ask the guys there, because they're going to be able to point you to the right hook for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got anything
Would
else?
agree.
Good? Okay. No problem. Anything else? Who else we got? Okay, I think that's going to wrap up our little Q&A up here. Do you like to say anything else, John?
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. And again, you know, it doesn't have to be a Q&A like this for you to come ask us questions. So if you ever have questions, definitely let us know. You guys definitely want to stick around and stay tuned for our very own Rachel Leinweber on the Vice.
Yeah. Don't know how to turn it off.
I'm happy to share with you my new creation with Umpqua Feather Merchants, and that is the Mini Leech Jig Damsel. For those who fish still waters and rivers alike, you realize during the course of the summer season, eventually the fish go in a feeding frenzy, and it looks literally like a killer whale trying to attack its food. These fish are spraying water everywhere, chasing these swimming damsels in water that can be as shallow as 6 inches. The cool thing about this fly, just like with the Mini Leech Jig, is that you can place it in shallow water below indicators and dry flies, and it's unbelievable just how effective it truly is. The pattern starts with a 60-degree jig hook, the XT500 from Umpqua. We're also going to use a green radiant slotted tungsten bead. Now the one thing we'll add to this, and most importantly to represent the damsel, are the eyes. So for the eyes, we're going to use extra small mono eyes from Hairline. To start the design, I'm simply going to do 2 to 3 wraps of thread right behind the eye of the hook, break that flush, and then do 1 or 2 secure more. I'll then grab the small, extra small mono eyes, and I'm going to place them on my side of the hook shank and perform 1 wrap, a 2nd wrap, and then turn the eyes and figure 8 around the eyes. And this is going to be a way to secure the eyes, again, to represent the damsel and to give it a very unique look. Now, instead of continuing the design, I'm simply at this point going to grab the whip finish tool, and I'm going to whip finish off the eyes, making sure that everything is secure and that I have the eyes in place, because we are going to eventually supply Loctite super glue. So I'm going to come back, whip finish with 2 wraps right underneath the eyes, grab the scissors, cut that tag in fairly flush. I'm then going to come back with small wire, and I'm going to supply 1 or 2 drops of Loctite super glue, securing the eyes down on both sides. That way we know the eyes are flush, and I'll do 1 more just to be safe below. Making sure everything's secure, and eventually when that dries, it's going to secure the eyes and add more durability to the fly. I'll then grab, open up the jaws, make sure that everything is flush, and I'm going to place the hook down level. And then I'm going to slide the tungsten bead up to directly behind the eyes. And you can see what we've developed here. Now we have the mono eyes represent the damsel eyes, and then we have the bead that's slid forward. And when the bead comes forward, eventually we're going to disguise that in the design and make of this fly. I'll then come back with my thread, and I'm going to build up a nice even path behind the bead to secure it down. Again, I want it as flush as possible against the eyes, and then I'll wrap using the tag end of thread elevated up at an angle of 45 degrees, get nice, secure, even, and symmetrical wraps all the way towards the bend. I'll then grab the tag end, break that flush here. Then I'll come in with crystal flash. Now I'm a fan of using peacock color crystal flash here, and again, we're trying to build up some sheen and shine on the body, but we don't want this to be overkill. So I'll grab a piece about 3 to 4 inches in length. I'm going to bend that around the thread, elevate the thread up, and slide this down to the hook shank. I'll then secure wrap on top of that, moving back 2 or 3 times, and then wrap that forward towards the bead. Again, building up a smooth runway and then stopping. From here, we're just going to trade off using the thumb and index on both dominant and non-dominant fingers, and I'm going to wrap this evenly moving forward all the way towards the bead and just building up a nice, even, clean, green segmented body. We want this to be as flush and clean as possible. It's not all going to be shown, just enough to add enough sheen and attracting shine for the fish to see it as they're swimming the shallows. I'll do 3 loose wraps. I'm going to cut that flush towards the hook shank, wrap forward, get all the tag ends down, again building up that nice, smooth, clean runway. I'm going to bring this back a little bit further, and I'm going to leave a little bit of sheen and shine, but not a ton. And then I'm going to come in here, I'm going to grab some resin, and with 1 or 2 drops of resin, I'm going to paint that over the body, just building up a nice, even, secure base. You can do it on both sides, top and bottom. Come back with my light, hit that, secure that down. And once I hit this and secure it down, I then know that I have flash and a durable body, because again, these are going to be very aggressive strikes. Then I'll come back with another piece of my favorite material, the micro pine squirrel. And I'm going to leave this relatively long just to show that you can add length to this fly just to represent a lot of movement. So I'm going to grab this piece. Again, I'm making sure that the skin is cleaned, and I'm trying to match the distance behind the bead as much as possible. This is going to extend a little bit further back than we have on the mini leech jig or the mini leech, but I'm simply going to flip the skin like we did before, place this on top of the hook shank behind the bead, perform 1 loose wrap, give that little mohawk a hairdo. For those of you like myself who lost their hair when they took a shower at the age of 18, this is a chance to give yourself a hairdo. We're going to wrap that skin forward towards the bead. Again, try to build up a nice, smooth, even runway, enough to where we can secure and also get movement from the ostrich when we supply it later. Now at this point in the design, if you have any stragglers, anything left over, you can always cut those clean. We're going to move the fly upside down. So I'm going to take it out of the jaws, I'm going to flip it, place it back in, and that way we're building the rest of the fly from below. We can't do this from above. So I'm going to secure wrap back a couple more times, and we're going to build up a nice, even thorax and legs, representing the legs here of a lot of your swimming damsels. So at this point, I'm going to grab 1 piece of pre-cut D skin and olive, and I'm going to place that on top of the hook shank. I want it to be flush right underneath the hook point. So right there you can see I needed to make an adjustment. If you need to make any adjustments, now's the time. I'm going to wrap that forward towards the bead, wrap this back, securing it 2 to 3 times to where it's nice and flush against the back, or what's going to be the back of the thorax of the damsel. I'm then also going to do the same thing here with a piece of pearl tinsel and large, Vivus pearl tinsel. I'm going to build this up as well, making sure that I wrap this on top of the hook shank when the hook is upside down, wrapping this forward towards the bead, and then wrapping all the way back again towards the bend. So we have tinsel in front of the D skin, and then we're going to come back here with another piece of my favorite material, and that is the ostrich. We'll grab a piece of olive ostrich herl, make sure that we've cleaned it off, and again we want the spine facing the eye of the hook, the material facing the bend. Any leftover stragglers, grab them clean. So I'm going to place this with 1 loose wrap, make sure that it's all facing forward, spine towards the eye, wrap this towards the bead itself, then I'll come back with the ostrich, and I'm going to wrap this nice and smooth, even wraps moving towards the eye of the hook. And in doing this, you just want to secure every wrap and make sure you're building up the legs nice and clean, nice and even towards the bead. And you can see it's a little bit longer than what we do with the mini leech jig or the mini leech. And the reason for that is you're trying to maximize the representation of legs. Once I get to this point, I'll then secure wrap down with 1 loose wrap, followed by 2 or 3 secured wraps. I want to make sure all the material's flush, nice and clean. I'll cut that tag in fairly close, blowing it if you need to. Cut any stragglers out. A lot of this will be covered up. I'll then grab that tinsel, and I'm going to move the tinsel over the top, grab the thread, and work it around the bead and the tinsel. So I'll do 1 loose wrap, a second loose wrap, and then I'm going to secure this down twice. And you can see by doing that, I'm adding a nice bit of flash, and I'll leave a little bit longer tag end, and then we'll move the fly a little bit and clean off any stragglers right behind the eye on both sides, just to make sure it's nice and clean. Nice clean representation of legs. So after doing that, here's the secret. So I want to disguise the bead at this point in the design. And the reason I came up with the idea to disguise the bead is that I want to make sure everything's secure and clean, but I want to make sure it represents the head and the body of the damsel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the skin, pull it over the top of the eye of the hook, turn the vise and make sure it's measured out correctly. At this point, I'm going to switch to my non-dominant hand and I'm going to pull down and then use my finger to push up. I'll grab my dominant index finger and with my fingernail, I'm going to scrape right on top of the eye of the hook. And by scraping here, you get a little jump in movement. You can see that eventually that eye feeds through. Then I'll come back and perform one loose wrap here, which secures the back of the fly down. And then I'm going to turn and then secure wrap behind the bead and underneath. And by doing that, I basically build up the head of the fly. So you can see that one wrap. I'll come back and do a second wrap. I'm then going to come in with the whip finish tool. I'm going to secure wrap here twice, once, twice, secure that down, flush. I'll grab that tight, cut that fairly close right against the D skin. I'm going to then grab a small piece of wire, dip it in Loctite super glue, and I'm going to place it right on top of the thread and the hook shank there. If you have any stragglers, just try to get those off and free. Nice smooth wipe there. Then I'm going to turn and do the same thing on the back and underneath. So back and underneath, I'm going to wipe, make sure I get Loctite super glue in there. I'll grab the scissors, cut that D skin all the way down and flush, turn it back over, and you can see how that represents the legs of the damsel. So now you have the moving legs of the damsel, the extension of the body, and the cool thing about this design when you look at the head is the head represents the eyes and the thorax of the fly, and then you still have the tungsten bead underneath, semi-disguised, and then to complete the fly, I'll come in with a Copic marker and olive, and I'll mark up the eyes. So I'm going to do one little dot on this side, and do the same with the little dot on the opposite side, and that is the mini leech jig damsel. Hopefully that one came out clean on that side. How's it look?
Hi everyone, my name's Rachel Leinweber. I'm the general manager here at Anglers Covey, and today I'm going to tie just some fun bugs. So these are guide flies. They're not real flies. One of them barely has a name so far. We have a caddis and a crane fly larva. So we'll just get started. The very first one I'm going to tie right now, I'm calling it the Lizzo. And the reason for that, I'll just show you a finished one first, and we'll go in how do we do that, is because it has this little wiggly butt. So this is a caddis larva. So we have some legs, but the most important part is the butt that likes to move around. So if you have a better name than Lizzo, I would love to hear that, but that's just the one I've come up with so far. Now, the way this fly originated is one of my best friends is a professional tyer for MFC who has a pattern called the Kryptonite Caddis. Being that we have a big brother, little sister relationship, I set out to make a fly that was better than his. I wanted it to be better and cooler than the Kryptonite, and I wanted it to fish better, purely out of spite, not out of any desire for to fish well or artisticness, nothing. So it took me a while, but I have one that I believe is better, and it's more fun to tie, and it's just fun. So first, we're going to start out, and I tie it pretty big just so it's easy to see. I like to tie this on a TMC 2488H, and I like the H because it's nice and heavy. So I never worry about this breaking off. If I snag it on a stick or a rock, I can just yank it out, and I'm not worried about that hook bending out at all. And so first thing we're going to do is I just use a very, very heavy tungsten black bead on here. So I'm just going to put the bead on my hook, just like you're putting it for any bead head. And the one I'm using is just a plain black. It's not a black nickel or anything, and it's a 3.8. So very, very big, if you see here. So, but now that I've beaded my hook, I'm going to take this out and just set it aside, because the most fun part is the next part, and I need to use my vise in an untraditional method. So the way we make that little tail now, so the little piece of the larva, is literally something that I have just come up with because it works best for me. There might be 10 better ways to do it, but this is my way. So if you've ever seen these little dental flossers you can buy at Walmart in packs of 100, I have one of these. And so first I'm going to take these small or extra small, depending on your hook size, little green glass beads. And I am going to just thread this onto the flosser. And being that this flosser has a little round end, I can put that bead on it and not worry about it slipping off or falling. And it took me a while to figure out to do this instead of just putting it right onto the material I use for the tail, because that would just drop all over my tying room, be in my carpet, vacuum. It was a problem. So I am going to put 4 of these on, and the particular glass bead that I'm using is just a chartreuse glass bead, and it's got a little bit of iridescence to it. And I like it for when I do just this plain little larva. It's got a little sparkle to it, a little something extra. So I'm going to put 4 on here initially, and then we are going to get a mercury bead after that. So starting just like this. Earlier today I was talking to one of our staff named Josie, and I'm just going to put it here to sit there for a second. About back in the 90s, we made these beady babies, they were called. We'd make little lizards and raccoons, all sorts of stuff out of beads and thread, and it made me feel really, really old because she had no idea what I was talking about. So that was a fun moment for me this morning. But that's essentially the same method that we're going to use to make this tail to still give it some wiggle and give it a little bit of give. So I've got all of these threaded here, and I end with that mercury glass bead. So it's a clear glass with a silver inside, and that's just going to mimic the little gas bubble for caddis when they're emerging. So you can make it with just green, you can make it with a tan, a cream, but I like to do it with that chartreuse to look like the caddis we have here in the South Platte in Arkansas, but just with that little clear bead at the end for that gas bubble. So I'm just going to set that down, and the material that I found has worked really well for me is just tippet. So I'm just using a 5X tippet here, and I've played around with like a 12-pound fluoro before, thinking, oh, this will be really tough. It doesn't allow enough movement. It's not enough wiggle. So even though you would think it's still tippet in the water, it doesn't allow enough of the telltale Lizzo wiggle that we want. I've also started doing this with thread. Thread broke. I would get maybe 1 or 2 fish out of it, but if that fish got the piece that's wiggling on that fly, the thread would just break. So I've come to really like just 5 or 6X. It works great. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to pinch the end of that 5X in my vise. I love these Regal vices because there's so much tension on here. It really just holds it well. And there's nothing else that I have to dial in or change tension-wise. All I have to do is squeeze, put it in, and let go. And it holds it perfectly fine. And then I'm going to use this dental flosser just like a bobbin threader. If you ever use a bobbin threader to thread when you're just starting your fly out, exactly the same method. So I'm going to take my tippet, I'm going to put it through the loop in this little dental flosser, okay? And while holding one end, I'm just going to slide these beads. So now they are right on the tippet. So hopefully you can see that. And so now these beads are through here. I'm going to take one end of that tippet and just take it out of the flosser. So now I've got the beads all by themselves on the tippet. It's just a lot easier too for me than threading each bead individually onto the leader or onto the tippet. Then they go everywhere or they flick off your finger. It's just a pain. So that flosser saves a lot of time. Now here's the key part of this. So I'm going to take the other end of my tippet and I'm going to put them through the beads, but I'm going to leave that clear bead, the mercury bead, off. So I'm going to skip that one. And then with my other fingers, I'm pinching all 4 of the green beads together, leave the clear out, and then we're gonna take that tip and we're gonna thread it right in the reverse through those 4 green beads, okay? So right here, and then I'm gonna tighten this up. Notice that mercury bead is still in the loop, and I'm gonna pull it tight, just like this. So now you have both pieces of your tippet coming out the same side, and you have a pretty secure, wiggly tail here. And now I can leave this as loose as I want, and these can still slide up and down. Notice this clear bead right in here is what's stopping these from sliding right out. But for this fly, I like to leave it kind of on a medium. I don't want it to be super, super tight where I'm holding this, because that doesn't allow any movement. I let it be a little loose. So now we are done with putting the tippet in the vise. So I'm just gonna set that down in a place where you don't knock it off, because you'll have to do that all over again. We're gonna put our hook right back, and now we can start the actual tying of the fly. So here I'm using a black thread. I'm using the Semperfli Nano Silk Black in the 30, and I like this because it's really, really small, but it's really strong for its size. It's nice and smooth, comes out of the bobbin well. It almost felt like a UTC almost, but it's a lot stronger, I think. And it took me a while to get on the Semperfli train. I thought it was all social media marketing garbage for a while, and then I started using it, mostly because a friend of mine gave me some for free, and I was like, oh, okay, it's pretty legit. All right, so now we are going to take this tail. I take it in my left hand, and just like we're putting on any material, I'll put it here at a diagonal between myself and the vise, and I'm just gonna do a couple of pin traps here and snug it down, just a couple, because once you do a couple, you can use these other ends of your tippet and snug it till it's just the right amount. And I like it right like this, so there's still a lot of wiggle there, and so the river currents, anything like that, will give it that movement, but not so tight that it's stiff. And then I'm just gonna trim these, not crazy short, just a little bit, just like that. All right, and then I'm still gonna hold on to these, and I'm going to wrap it some more. And you really wanna secure it, and sometimes I'll even take this first bead. I don't know if you guys could see that because my hand was covering it, but I'll take this first bead and put a wrap right behind it, and that really secures this tail down. All right, so I'm just gonna do a couple more, drop that down. All right, I like this. It's coming up a little bit, which is what we want. I don't like it when it goes just flat. That looks boring. I want it to look up and kind of gummy. All right, so then this next step, we want it to have some legs, right? Because any little caddis larva that's outside of its home has legs, and we want it to look a little bit buggier. And I've done this a few different ways for myself for the past. I've done like a hen soft hackle, works great. But that's another step that you have to do. I've done some dubbing, brushed it out, and then done an ostrich collar. Works great, but that's an extra step. So being the lazy and economical fly fisher that I am for time, I should probably say that. Like, I have more than a full-time job. I'm not a production fly tyer. I'm not a professional fly tyer. I tie for myself and for the 1 or 2 guide trips a week that I do. That's it. So I am no Landon Mayer, so I go purely on just utility. So the material I'm tying in here is, again, it's Semperfli, but it's the ice straggle chenille. And I like this because A, you only have to do a couple wraps of it. B, you see all these little straggles, essentially stragglers hanging off. These look really buggy and like perfect legs where they're in the water current. So I'm just gonna do 2 to 3 wraps here, just enough to get quite a few little buggy legs. And then we're just gonna secure it. And that is literally it. So then I'm gonna make sure I have my tail the way I like it, and that I didn't just pull it out, which I think I did. Yep, we just pulled the tail out, shoot. So that's a good example of why not to make it really short. I might make it a little bit longer. Let me pull that again. Well, actually, so let me do this a different way since I have an opportunity to do it again. Do you have any questions so far, those of you who are here in person? Nope. So on a caddis larva, because it's kind of a grubby stage of it, I don't do a tail because it's not quite to that adult stage yet. It's still very much just like a free-flowing larva. And really too, because it looked like it just came out of its case or just like it's emerging, especially if we put that gas bubble on the back. On this one, I won't do a gas bubble. I'll just do a regular one. And then I'm trying to show you how I can just thread it on here too. Just threading it straight on the 5X. Alrighty. And this length is something you can play with too. If you use bigger beads, maybe you'll only want 3 of them on there total. And whenever you're counting for your beads, you want to make sure you think about that very last one is the one you skip and kind of almost look separate from the tail. And so you really want to do the length of the tail that you want and then add one. But again, that's something that you can play with based on your hook size. This one, I like the 5 beads because we're using a 14 size hook. It's huge. If I was using an 18, which is a size I really like to use this on, I would probably maybe do 3, 4 max. And then I would use the glass beads in an extra small instead of a small. Does that make sense? So you always just want to adjust. And then one thing I've done too is use kind of a cream colored bead, or Killer Caddis has these awesome beads that are glass. They're sort of clear glass, but the inside is a cream color. So if you're in an area that has a lot of those creamier colored caddis larvae that aren't quite that neon green that we see a lot here, then that would be a great bead to use also. Speaking back to like my friend Juan, who I used his kryptonite to come up with this. He makes a really cool amber, like almost like golden orange colored of his kryptonite. And it looks really good. And so this would be perfect with like an amber or maybe like a little golden bead. All right, so there he is. I'm gonna whip finish. And also, if you can get your hands on this tool, this makes a huge difference. This isn't a normal whip finish. It is the mid size of the Tiemco whip finisher. For the flies I tie, I don't do a lot of huge, I don't do any saltwater. I don't do a lot of huge flies. I do a lot of midges, a lot of caddis, a lot of baetis. So this midge size whip finish is life-changing. We couldn't find them for a long time, but as soon as we brought them back, I bought a couple of them just so I will never be without it ever again. Alrighty, so that's the Lizzo caddis. Again, if you have any better names for it, I am totally open. Is it gonna good? Yeah. Not everyone knows who Lizzo is, but she's an inspiration. I bet she has no idea she's inspired a fly fishing fly. I'm sure she's okay without it too. But yeah. I should say thank you for inspiring this. All right, so we've got a little bit of time left, so I'm going to tie the next fly, which this is totally opposite size-wise. This is called the Duke of Earl. Duke spelled D-O-O-K, because it kind of looks like a dookie. So, but this is a crane fly larva, and this is tied on a size 4 hook, which a lot of times in Colorado, South Platte, Arkansas, why the heck would you fish with a size 4 unless it's a streamer, right? But in a lot of our scenes, in a lot of our like looking around, trying to find entomology classes, even in our 201 classes we teach on the water, we're finding crane flies that are this big, if not larger. And so this works as an awesome point fly or a tractor fly. And a lot of times when I'll fish this, especially in the South Platte, I'm not fishing any split shot at all. I'm using this as my weight. And just because it's giant, it gets down fast. Now, one thing I do say is when you're fishing this fly, before you fish it, crimp that barb, because otherwise you are going to give a fish brain surgery. It's going to be really hard to get out. So always crimp that barb before you actually fish this, because it's gigantic. And the hook that we're going to use for this is the Umpqua U106. It's pretty affordable, but what I really like about it is it's got this little hunchback, we'll say. So it's got a little bump in it. So instead of just being a straight shank, it has a little bit of a shape there, which I like because crane flies just naturally flowing down the river are not going to look straight as a stick, right? They might be curved, but a lot of them aren't even perfectly curved. They have a little bump. So that is the whole reason that I go for this hook. And now I tie it in a size 4 because it's huge. It's really attractive to the fish, but you can tie it smaller. Now, while I prep some of my materials here, I'll tell you a little bit about where this fly came from. So this fly was not mine. I did not invent it. A guy named Earl Hecker invented it. And he was one of our guides here at the shop for years and years and years. He was one of our best guides. And in 2018, or for 2019, he was actually up for Guide of the Year. However, he passed away in 2018. But I was his girlfriend, and so I stole a lot of his patterns, even while we were dating. And so this one is kind of my way to just keep his patterns and things that he created and just kind of came out of his own brain, still living on, because they were freaking good. And the guy was an amazing fisherman, obnoxiously good at what he did. And he tied every single night after guide trip, every night. And he was great at coming up with what we call guide flies, which is just cheap, simple flies that aren't hard to tie, that you can tie quickly. And you can just mass produce. And this is one of those. So I like a lot of crane fly patterns because they're complicated. They look very realistic. This one is not complicated. I think it still looks realistic, but for how simple it is, it's fast and it gets the job done. I don't think fish are going to stop when they see such a big, juicy meal full of calories and fat and protein and think, oh, does it really have the right legs on it? Is it 2.5 inches? I don't know. I think we give fish too much credit. Our fish that we raise in the hallway here, they eat rocks half the day. So for this pattern, for a crane fly, it's all we need it to be. I'll say that without being too mean to this. So on this, I'm just using a UTC, so Ultra 70, and I'm using it in the olive color. Thread on this fly doesn't matter. Just use what you like. Color doesn't even matter because it's barely going to show. So I'm just going to add on some thread initially here, and I'm going to travel it to the back, and just these big gaps. It doesn't have to be right next to each other because I'm going to add a few materials right back here. And the reason I'm adding materials on the back is just to make this a cheap fly also. We don't want to waste on the size 4 hook, putting stuff all the way up and then wrapping it all the way back. I'd rather just start it where we're going to wrap it, make sure it's secure, but then you can tie twice as many flies in the same amount of materials. Alrighty, so what we're using here, oh, perfect, thanks. One thing you can do with this too, I won't do this on this one, but you can also weight these. So in the South Ply, a lot of times I find if I weight them and I start this with some lead wire on it, similar to how you would do with a woolly booger, it can be almost too heavy and then you're just dredging and dragging your rig. So I have 2 different sections in my box where I have the weighted ones and the unweighted ones. If it's high water situation, which is a lot of times where you're gonna have those crane flies pushing into the river system anyways, those weighted ones can be nice if you have a high enough flow. But I'll use them every time after it rains, and sometimes just being a size 4 by itself is plenty of weight, so you don't need a whole lot. So I'm going to tie these materials in the reverse order that we're going to use them, and that's something that you want to do with almost any fly that you tie, and it makes it easier when it comes to wrapping them back over. So I like to use a pretty big scud back, and we're going to tie that in first, and I like the 1/4 inch, and you can do this in a light olive. I also have a tan here, which is really nice. If you have a crane fly area where it tends to be a little bit more olivey, because the chenille we use is green, if you put that tan over it, it makes it look a little bit grubbier. But this is probably bigger than any scud backing you use for scuds, but it helps us out a whole lot here. So we're just gonna rough tie this in. It does not have to be pretty at all. So this is all gonna get covered up. So I like to just pinch it down here. And we have enough material where it's going to be super secure. It's not going to come out, but it doesn't have to be pretty. All right. Next, we're going to tie in, this is a gold oval French tinsel. And I believe, and that's what you should use for this. I'm pretty sure these are ties for Christmas ornaments that I got. Again, I'm not a professional tyer. It doesn't matter. I use stuff that I have and that looks just like tinsel, and I've got a whole lot of it. And this is a step that really adds some pizzazz, should we say? Like flies need pizzazz, but to our flies. Whereas a lot of other crane fly patterns are a little bit more basic and more one tone. Just having that little bit of sparkle, that little bit of gold underneath helps them look a little bit wetter, a little bit slimier, which, as anyone is familiar with a crane fly, we want. So this next material I'm going to tie in, this is a trilobal Antron chenille in size medium. I love this chenille. Can you use other chenilles? Yes, but I like this best because the fibers on it are very stiff. So when we're going to wrap our other materials over it, it's not really going to crush it. It's going to retain a lot of its size and a lot of its bulk. If I were to use a different, more traditional chenille, like a standard, it would get crushed. So I'd have to use almost twice as many wraps and way more material to get the same kind of bulk that I want on this fly. Alrighty, so for this, I do want that bulk, so I'm going to travel my thread up towards the front. Now, I'm going to be careful not to crowd the eye because that is very easy to happen on this fly with how many materials we've got here. So I do a couple pin traps, and then we're just going to travel our thread back down. Again, not making these pretty consecutive wraps. We're just making it secure. All right, so I feel like that's good. It's not moving when I'm pushing it to either side of the hook, and that's what we want. So next, I'm just going to take our Antron chenille here, and we're gonna just do consecutive tight wraps. So we're making sure these are right on top of each other. And to do that, I'm kind of pulling it almost on top of the one previous so that it just seats itself right next to the previous wrap. All right, so we're gonna leave that right here. And I'm going to take my thread and I'm gonna cross wrap it just a few times. And this is securing that down, just one further step. And by cross wrapping it, I mean that I am just kind of going opposite of those wraps. So notice I went toward me with the chenille. I'm going away from me with the thread here. And that just gives it one more little ounce of durability. So once I do that, I feel like it's nice and secure. Then I'm gonna trim this little edge off. Alrighty. And then I like to get all the fuzz off first. And there will be fuzz. This Antron goes everywhere, so just be prepared for that. And then next, we're just gonna take this tinsel and we're gonna wrap it, and we're not going right on top of itself with this, or it would just be a pure sparkle fly, which we don't need. We're just gonna use it to segment it the way a crane fly is naturally segmented. Because they look just like caterpillars, right? But like little aquatic caterpillars. So we want some segmentation in there that we wouldn't get without a tinsel. And a wire I've found is just too much, and it doesn't show through our scud backing, which we're gonna wrap. The wire really gets dulled out by this scud. We want it to really pop. And the tinsel seems, at least for me, the only thing I've really found that does that. I have tried some crystal flash, doesn't really work. I've used some other materials and they just don't sparkle or shine through the way I want them to. All right, so now we're gonna do just our scud backing. So there's a couple things you can do on this. You can either do it completely and cover up the whole back bit, which is like this guy I did. I don't know if this is gonna focus on that. Which is totally fine. It just looks purely grubby. Or you can leave some of these fibers out the back, because those natural crane flies, they have those little, I don't think they're legs, just grabbers towards the back of them. So you can leave some of the fur out. I also like doing that sometimes too, because some water can get in there. It's not waterproofed at that point, which makes it even heavier. So it's totally up to you. Choose your own adventure style fly. Again, this is a guide fly, not a professional tire fly. The goal for it is to be simple and useful. So now as I'm doing this, notice I'm putting quite a bit of tension on this scud backing. Scud backing can break, so you want to kind of find that happy medium. And each wrap, I'm going over about half of the previous wrap, just to make it nice and tight. And we want it to look kind of grubby. So notice this is not a nice smooth shell type thing. If we wanted that, we could follow this up with some epoxy or some UV stuff, but we don't want that. I want it to look segmented and kind of grubby. All right, so then we come here at the front and I pull that one extra tight and I do a couple more. And then I also, oops, I let it go a little too far. Like to just hold it with my hand to keep that tension on it. Alrighty. So it's nice and smooth there. Now I'm going to use my thread, tie it off. And I do quite a few here because I've got some tension on that. And before I snap it, I'm going to shrink down my thread just to make it a little bit tight. And then I'm going to go back over the top of it a little bit also. And that just helps it be a little bit more secure. So you're not just having it go one direction and then tightening down. All right. So then I feel confident enough that that's not just going to snap back if I snip it off, which happens, and it's devastating. It makes me super angry every time it happens. So I can just cut it off. And then you have that little nub that's still there material. I just cover that right up with thread. And you want it to be like a smooth-ish head, but you can also do here is add some legs if you really want it to be more lifelike. You can add some little soft hackle. Ostrich is really good here if you want to add just a little bit of lifelikeness. But honestly, I don't think it matters because again, we overestimate how smart fish are. They're not going to look. They just see this big grubby meal coming. And one of the reasons I love fishing cranefly larvae so much is that trout are very opportunistic. So they see this big meal. A lot of times you will get hit so hard on your rig that you won't know what happened because they see, it's not like they're just sipping midges in that stream, right? They see one big opportunity. And if you think about it, like how many of those midges would they have to eat the same amount of calories, proteins, fats that come in one crane fly? So they will move out of their way to attack these, which is also why I like to use these on guide trips because clients just think it's super, super fun. And they giggle. And I giggle when they eat something that's this big and ridiculous for our water. So that is the Duke of Earl. Any questions? Alrighty. So next up, we're going to have Brian Hilbert Ty. He's the guy who does all of our social media here at Anglers Covey and one of our most phenomenal guides. So he'll be tying up some stuff for you here in just a few minutes. Good.
Your artwork.
Oh, it's Valentine's Day.
I know,
Keep
I
nails for
know.
Valentine's Day. That's funny. Thanks. Sorry, I made a mess. I'll clean it up really fast. I will. See, he said no worries. He's nice. Do you want me to turn this off?
All right, my name is Randy Hanner, and I've been an Umpqua Signature fly designer since 2013. I've got a few flies in the catalog. Most of my stuff's competition inspired. I was a former team member of Fly Fishing Team USA. I was a member from 2009 to 2013. And a lot of this stuff that I'm going to be tying today stems from my competition days. And the fly we're going to start out with is my jigged green drake. It was my first submission into the Umpqua catalog. And the story behind it, it was in a competition on the frying pan. And I needed an anchor fly to hold down some of my smaller nymphs. And while we were competing, it was super, super windy. And so we just needed something heavy that would hold our leader in the water. And this fly stemmed from that. And so it ended up catching me quite a few fish. For the time, it was a Team USA record with 55 fish caught in 1 3-hour session. That year, it was just fantastic. So I'm going to start with this is a size 12 Tiemco 403 BLJ with a 3.5 millimeter bead on it. And then for the tail, we're going to use Coq de Leon. And the thread, you can just use any olive thread that you want. I'm using Danville's 70 denier flat Flymaster 6/0. So just take off a bunch of these fibers here, start my thread. I like to tie my tails a lot shorter, so I'll only go about half length. Really makes the fly, it gives it a much larger profile in the water, and I don't want that. So we'll shorten it up just a little bit. Next, I'll tie in my rib, just some small ultra wire. And then I'll just try to taper up the body just a little bit towards the bead. I don't add any lead weight behind the bead. You can if you want, but this is a pretty slim profile fly and it'll get down pretty quick. Next, I'm going to use the dubbing that I use is Arizona Synthetic Peacock, just in the natural peacock color. So I'll just add a little bit in here. And I'm actually going to take this all the way up to right behind the bead. It helps build up the thorax and the abdomen. And then what I'm going to do is just rib up all the way behind the bead. I'll do a half hitch in my wire, that way I don't mess up my scissors. And it just breaks right off. Next, for the wing case, I use Hairline's Diamond Braid in the bronze color. And I'll just tie that in right behind the bead. And then I'll go back down about halfway, because if you've ever looked at green drake nymphs, they are short, stout, beefy nymphs, and their thorax is actually quite large. So I'll add a lot more dubbing behind the bead here just to build up that thorax. And then just fold it right over. A couple wraps in front, and then I'll cut it off. I'm going to do a whip finish here, just to lock that in, but I'm actually going to cover all of that up with just a little bit more dubbing just to hide those fibers from the flat braid. Trim it down just a touch. The more fish you catch, the buggier it gets and the fishier it gets. But that is my green drake, just really a simple fly.
How's it going, guys? Brian Hilbert. Why don't you make him one? How we doing?
Good.
Appreciate you guys sticking through here the full length of the day to watch me tie a couple flies. All right. So we're gonna tie a Baetis pattern I came up with here years ago. It's changed a little bit over the years, but this is kind of the way I've been tying it here the last few seasons. Been calling this my day saver Baetis. So real simple bluing olive nymph. You can change the colors up to adapt any mayfly species that you're trying to imitate. If you wanted to do this for a PMD, instead of olive body with a gray thorax, I would do like dark brown and yellow. But other than that, the fly's going to stay the same. We're going to jump right into tying this guy. I'll kind of speak to how I like to fish it, some things that I do on this guy and why I do them. And, there's a million mayfly nymphs out there. Some will argue some catch more fishermen than fish. But this fly, I wanted to come up with something that the biggest thing for me, I'm kind of a nerd about entomology and aquatic insects. And through sampling the river, either through river seines or throat pumps, the biggest thing I've noticed is that the food that trout eats is way more slender than most of our fly patterns. Okay, and a lot of our imitations that we come out with are, in my opinion, really, really, really bulky. And although they catch fish and they do fine, when it comes to really tough tailwater trout, I find a slender profile will always outfish a big bulky fly when it comes to imitating midges and mayflies. So that's kind of the first point that I want to make here with this fly and why I designed it the way that I did. Pretty minimal materials. It's going to be all synthetic materials on this. We are going to use some A-dot uni thread. This is an olive dun. The thorax is going to be blue dun. It's kind of a light gray color. The tail is going to be this Vivus body quill, kind of in this rusty orange color. Wing case will be this black fluorofibers. And that is basically it. So I got a size 18 TMC 101 in the vise. This is just a standard dry fly hook. And I'm going to start that thread. I want to keep in mind here my proportions right when I'm putting this fly together. One of the biggest mistakes, new fly tyers, and even people have been doing this a little while, you have a tendency to end up what's called rushing the fly or crowding the eye. How many of you guys have ever been on the vise and you tie the most perfect fly ever, you get up towards the eye and you don't have enough room to tie in the last material? So a really good discipline is to start your thread where you want your abdomen to end, and it'll really help you out when it comes to finishing out the end of the fly there. So we're going to tie in this tail first. This body quill, I tell you what, this is a really underrated tail material. A lot of flies out there, and no disrespect to the other patterns, but there's a lot of flies out there that have a really bulky tail, and if you look at a mayfly nymph, the tail is incredibly sparse. We're talking, you can barely see this thing. You put a bluing olive nymph in your hand, the tail's almost not even there. And so what I like about this Vivus body quill, you can see it's almost translucent, and there's one fat fiber followed by 3 really small, exact size of a mayfly tail fibers in there. And so we want a tail on there that's, visible. We can see it, but it's not overbearing, right? It's just kind of a nice little sparse tail in the back.
The abdomen of this fly is going to be all thread. And so what I'm going to do is you can kind of see here my thread is pretty flat. I can see that kind of against the shank of the hook there, how when I go to wrap this, the thread is all spread out. I'm going to achieve that by spinning my bobbin counterclockwise. Whoops. And what we're going to do is just build this thread abdomen to a taper, okay? And the easiest way I can explain to make an effective taper is we're going to go the full length, 3/4, half, 1/4, and then finish it off, and then go over everything else. So I'm going to come down to the 3/4 mark and come back up. I'm going to flatten my thread again. We're going to go halfway, back up. Keep that thread nice and flat. About 1/4 of the way, back up. And now what I want to do is get this guy flat and smooth everything out here and come rearward on the fly all the way to the back. Now the rib or segmentation of this fly is a little unique. It's not going to look like much until we put some resin on it, but what I'm actually going to do here is just turn my vise ever so slightly, and we're going to spin and tighten the thread back up so it's almost like a rope. Okay, this is going to make it a little bit thicker and kind of a little bit more prominent. Instead of laying flat, it's going to be almost like a rope, if you will. Okay, and I like to spin this pretty good until I see my bobbin start to rise up. That way I know it's getting tight. And we're going to use that thread to add segmentation by just palmering that forward with nice even segmenting wraps. So you can kind of see there, that's going to give it a little bit of segmentation, but it's also extremely subtle. I'm going to end with the olive thread here just by throwing in a whip finish. I'll trim that off. So I'm all about durability in my fly patterns. I use a lot of super glue and a lot of UV resin. When I first started tying this fly, UV resin wasn't a thing, but I have since added the addition of this. What we're going to do is just put a light coating over this guy, covering it entirely. We're not trying to build up bulk like a perdigon. We're just giving it a little bit of a coating of this really thin Solarez, and then I like to take my finger and just dab off the excess. Now when I cook this, I like to use my rotary feature where I'm just going to spin this guy around. And you notice that does a couple things here. It makes that segmentation we did with the thread really kind of pop out, okay, to where you can see it looks exactly like a mayfly abdomen, right? Subtle segmentation, little itty bitty ridges, gives the body some good texture, but also this thing is totally bulletproof. When I first started tying this fly and just did thread, after 4 or 5 fish, their teeth would end up shredding it up and ended up starting to fall apart. By doing that resin coating on there, it's basically indestructible. We're going to jump in now with this blue dun thread. And I drop my fluorofibers on the floor. Glad to see earlier I wasn't the only one to do that. So I decided on fluorofibers here because they're also an extremely durable material and fairly easy to work with. This is about done. You can see I've worked through about this whole hank here, but this is a size 18. Typically on a size 18, I'm going to have about 12 to 15 of these fibers. I'm going to cut off just a working length here. I want to make sure that I square that off so it's nice and even when I tie this in. This is going to be our wing case and our legs. So I'm going to come up back towards the eye. I'm going to spin my thread counterclockwise so when I do give it some slack, you can see it wants to jump rearwards there. It's going to aid me in tying this in. I'm going to tie it in long and then pull it to length and then wrap over it. So I want to keep this pressure high so that that remains on top of the hook. And we want to build this proportion-wise about 2/3 abdomen, 1/3 thorax is kind of my rule of thumb. Okay, so I'm going to about the 30% mark, and all we're going to do is build up a thread thorax here. Now you can play around with the colors a little bit here. I kind of gone back and forth between doing a tan abdomen or a gray one. I'm not sure one works better than the other, just whichever one you're most confident in. This blue dun is kind of a cool color, and fish seem to like it quite a bit here. So when I build this, my thread's getting a little out of control there on me. Mayfly nymphs, especially our blue wing olives, if you look at them, their wing case tapers the other direction. The fattest part of the wing case is at the very back, and it's going to taper pretty steep forward towards the head. And so I want the profile that I built here, the fattest part, to be back here by the wing case, and then to taper slowly as I go forward. I'm kind of looking for that shape there, if you guys can see that. Now, tying all this off, there is an important sequence. Again, the number one mistake in beginner fly tying, and me myself, when I first started doing this, is doing too many wraps when it comes to secure materials. Okay, when we wrap our wing case forward, I have a very specific tie down sequence. It's going to help you. As long as you do this every time, you'll always have a nice, neat, small head that's not overflowing onto the eye and not creating unnecessary excess bulk. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this and fold this forward, and I'm just going to capture that with one turn of thread. Okay, and that's going to give us that nice dark wing case that blue wing olives, when they're getting ready to emerge, have that nice flat dark wing case on the top. But just one turn of thread there. And then I'm going to angle this towards me just a little bit, and we want to roughly split these fluorofibers. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I haven't encountered a trout that didn't eat it because one side had 8 and the other side had 6. Just kind of eyeball it. I'm going to hold that bobbin securely, pull it rearward, and just do one turn of thread. So that's the far side of the legs. Okay, and I'm going to do the other side the same way. I'm going to take this, come over, and secure that with one turn. Okay, so now I got roughly half on one side, half on the other. There's an incredible amount of static in here, and it's making these go all over the place here, but bear with me. So right there, I've really secured the wing case and both sides of the legs with just 3 turns of thread. And we are ready to finish the fly off with a whip finish. I like to use the orange Sharpie here to put a little orange head on it for no other reason than I think it looks cool. We're just going to whip finish about 4 or 5 turns. Pull that tight. Trim that off. Now our legs here, we're going to trim just a hair longer than the wing case, about like so. And then I like to pinch the legs down and pull them up to kind of crinkle them a little bit. It almost gives them kind of a bent look. But we're looking for about like so. And then last, we're going to finish it off here with just some Solaris bone dry. Really, 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 really small application right on the thread wraps on the head. That's going to hold it all together. We'll cure it up. And that is basically the finished Day Saver Baetis. You can imagine if I wasn't talking, this is a really quick fly, right? It's really just thread and some fluorofibers, this Vivus material on the back for the tail. But when it comes to fishing mayfly nymphs, in my opinion, I think when trout are feeding and their full-time job is to eat, right? So they're real good at it. That's all they do is decide what is food and what is not. I believe that the importance that you should be looking at in your fly should be profile, then size, then color, okay, in that order. And when I say profile, is it shaped like the food we're trying to imitate? That's really what I had in mind when I came up with this pattern, is I wanted a really slender profile, okay, that matched the naturals, that had the dark wing case, 2/3, 1/3 ratio, and a really, really sparse tail. Okay? And so, profile-wise, I think this kind of nails it. Okay, and I'm a little biased. This is really, I would say, one of the only mayfly patterns that I fish. The second part that I really like about it is it's incredibly durable. This is going to last you a really long time. I have legitimately had this on clients' rods. 15, 20 fish later, end of the day, we're putting it back in the box and I'm using it again the next day. Okay, for me, that's a good thing. Not having to change flies, you know, after a few fish, it's not falling apart. I'm a big fan of durability. Doing that abdomen there with that UV resin and having all synthetic materials instead of naturals, you know, like some flies that incorporate a natural tail. We've all been there. After 4 or 5 fish, the tail falls off. You got to dig in your box, grab a new one. This thing is pretty much indestructible, and you know, does a great job at fooling really techie fish. I've had a ton of success in Cheeseman Canyon, 11 Mile, Arkansas tailwater, South Platte at Deckers, fish that see a lot of flies. This is a really good one here to spin up and relatively simple. Doesn't require anything special. It's just really thread and a couple synthetic materials. So that's the Day Saver Betas there. You guys have questions on anything to do with that pattern before I move on? It's a great question. Oh, okay. The question was, why did I use the Vivus Body Quill as a tail instead of Coq de Leon? And to be honest, I've used both quite a bit over the years. I've really settled on this body quill, to be honest, because it's cheaper and it's much easier to work with than to pull off a couple of fibers of CDL and tie it in. But both work great. I think this kind of has almost like a little bit of a shuck illusion to it, right? You know, so you can fish that fly in the emergence and it still looks like an emerging mayfly with a little bit of the shuck at the end. I don't know. I think it's important anytime we're selecting a fly or designing a fly or fishing a fly, we want to be confident in it, right? You know, my answer might just be that I'm just really confident in that as a tail pattern, and it doesn't come off ever. So, anybody else questions on that? Strong. Cool. All right. We're going to, truth be told, I did not know Rachel was going to do a cranefly larva, so sorry we're doing 2 cranefly larvae here today. But I kind of have to do this one by default because it's probably one of my more popular patterns with clients, customers, and other guides here in the shop. We're going to tie my Philly cheese crane. And the Philly cheese crane is a cranefly larva that it's pretty unique. There's not really anything out there that's like it. And it got its name, to be honest, I was walking my dog with my girlfriend. And we were talking about this pattern and started to be kind of known. I didn't really have a name for it. I used to call it the bunny mop because it was made of rabbit. And kind of everybody associates a cranefly larva with a mop fly. And I was like, I got to think of something that's just like a huge unhealthy meal, you know, like a Philly cheesesteak. And to be honest, that kind of just stuck. And so since then, everyone's really been calling it the Philly cheese crane. This is like the ultimate guide fly. It is literally one material besides the thread. And I would say, without question, this fly catches 90% of the big fish that I catch throughout the year. Crane fly, they're not like a mayfly or a midge or, you know, this hatch matching type of food source that we're out there on the river trying to imitate. This is more of an opportunistic eat, right? So a lot of people associate crane fly as like a junk fly, like if we're fishing a worm or a leech, scuds, you know, eggs, things of that nature. But I have found actually, even I've been on the South Platte when flows are 80 CFS and watch fish move 3 feet out of their feeding lane to eat this thing, because I really do think they opportunistically take advantage of the big high calorie meal. And this color pattern here is the sand variant right here. Okay. If you come into the shop to buy this, we apologize in advance. We probably don't have it because everybody loves this fly so much. As soon as it comes in, the next day it's gone. So talk to this guy here about ordering more of it or knowing when it's going to come in. You can also find it online, but we try to keep it in stock. It seems like the more we order, the quicker it goes. So we apologize in advance for that. But let's jump into tying it. This is a really, really, really quick one. The longest part is just doing the trimming. So cranefly larva, it's a big meal, so we're going to use a big hook, right? This is the Umpqua 200R. This is the size 6. I'll do this as big as a 4. Tie them down to about an 8 is maybe the smallest I go. But to be honest, I've never been on the river and had on a 6 and been like, I better size down and put on an 8 and start whacking them. If a fish is going to eat the cranefly, I pretty much only carry this in like size 6 and maybe a little bit in size 8 for really clear water. So don't overthink the size. Go with the big meal. So we are going to use a little bit heavier thread. I like this UTC 140. We're going to do a tan. My bobbin threader over there. I'm going to do it old school way. How many of you guys have been here before? I'll figure, right? So, aside from the thread, color isn't that important, but I'm just going to do tan to kind of match. We're going to do this sand variant one here today. But I'll do these in olive, rusty brown, cream, and just do your thread color to match. So, cranefly, they're a pretty robust insect, right? And so we want this fly to be fat. Again, back to the profile side of things when we're choosing our flies. If you look at a cranefly, who here has taken a seine out there and seen a cranefly larva knows what I'm talking about? About a quarter of you. So think of a giant grub, maybe the size of your pinky finger almost. There's really not much more to them other than that. They're just a big, giant cheesesteak, right? So we want to incorporate some bulk. If I were to just tie the main material, which is this rabbit in and wrap it forward, the fly's way too skinny in my opinion. So what we're going to do is build up an underbody using some chenille. And what I'll do is I usually am just whatever color I have at home that I don't use a lot is what I'm going to use for this because it's all going to get covered up. Color doesn't matter too much here. I'm going to get about 8 inches or so and just tie that in about a hook or an eye length behind the hook eye. And we're just going to secure this all the way down to where when my thread is hanging, it's right even with the barb of the hook here. Okay. We'll advance that back forward. And then what I'm going to do is palmer this, and because I have big, clumsy, fat hands, I like to turn the hook upside down. I can pass this through without knocking my vise over. But I'm just going to build up a fat underbody here with this chenille. Again, color doesn't matter. This is medium-sized chenille. I don't know if I said that. But we're just going to secure that with a few wraps and trim that off. Okay. So kind of looking like a Pat's rubber legs with no legs, right? So from here, we're just going to wrap right over that chenille that we tied in. And I'm going to, for the most part, cover about, 60% of this up, especially at the back end here, because that's where we're going to be tying in our rabbit material. Now, I do this a couple different ways. We're going to do the unweighted one today. I do a bunch of these with a tungsten bead as well. The only difference is add a tungsten bead. So all I'm doing here is just covering up a lot of these fibers that are sticking out. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to arc my hook down a little bit. We're going to tie this material right here at the back. I want to just make sure that it's a little easier for me to tie that in if this is laying flat. All right, so I want to talk about the material here because this rabbit zonker varies a ton on what you're going to pick up off the shelf. Okay, the best material suited for this fly, pardon me, it's going to have this really thick hide to it. Everybody can see how thick that is. We're a strong 1/16 of an inch, okay? The thicker of hide that you can find in the package, so when you pick this stuff up, give it a good look and kind of look at it. You want the really thick stuff. Some of the stuff you're going to get, I'll show you the difference here, is really thin, okay? If you can kind of make that out. Okay, we're really, really thin there. This still works, certainly. I would maybe just go another layer with that chenille because the fly's going to end up too skinny at the end. So we have this whole zonker here. I'm going to start at the very back. You can see these fibers are all going rearward towards my left hand, okay? And we're going to take this and just measure out a tail the full length of that body. Okay, so I'm going to lay that on my hook. I'm just going to mark that with my right hand. And then what I'll do is usually just grab some saliva and coax that hair back to expose the hide. And I'll do the same thing for the fur that's on the front part of this, okay? We do that because when you tie this in, we want that thread going directly on the hide. If you try to tie over the hairs, eventually this is just going to slip out, okay? And if you don't moisten it, that rabbit hair, I promise you, is going to get tangled up in your thread and you're going to be throwing this thing around and getting all irritated. So a little bit of moisture. You can keep a sponge on your desk if you want. I'm old school. Okay, we're going to have that to where it wants to sit right there, okay? So I'm going to take my bobbin. I'm going to do 3 really tight turns, as tight as I can do without breaking the thread here. About like so. I'm going to fold that back, and I'm not going to necessarily wrap back over this as much as I'm just going to make a little bit of a thread dam that's creating some bulk right underneath that rabbit hide, and it's going to push the thread against the hide to really hold that in tight, okay? About like so. And we'll advance all the way forward. Throw on our half hitch. I'm going to reorient my hook here. Use my bobbin cradle here. All right. So from here, we want to anchor this guy into place. We're going to use some of this Wapsi cement. Holy moly. That is going everywhere. Side note, this stuff doesn't travel well, by the way. So, I got my glue here. I'm going to put a giant glob right there where I secured that. I'm going to do the same thing again at the head of the fly. Okay? And we got to kind of act quickly here before the glue dries. But I'm basically going to take this real tight, do a wrap covering up that whole tie-in point. And then at this point, we're just going to sweep these fibers back and do slightly overwrapping turns as I palmer this forward. Now if you bury or trap some hair in here, that's not a big deal. All the way until we're right there at the hook eye. I usually moisten here again and just create a little separation point right next to the eye of the hook. Do a little transfer, and I'm going to capture that with just a couple turns. Now if you capture some hair in here, it's not the end of the world. We're going to trim all this hair off, so. Okay. So, looking pretty wild so far, right? So at this point, all we need to do is secure this little butt end here. And when you're doing ones without a bead, this can be, if you're a little OCD and you want this thing to look perfect, it doesn't need to. The ones that end up in my guide box, the heads do not look incredibly awesome. But we'll try to make it look pretty here for this. But because I put a little bit of glue down at the head and then we wrapped it forward and secured it, that butt in there is going to stay almost exactly where I want it without a whole lot of thread wraps. And what I like to do is twist this on the hook to really coax that tag in to come around the corner. And then we're going to take our thread and just wrap a neat head right at the front. So I'm going to whip finish, not because we're finished here, but just so my thread doesn't end up getting knocked off. And I want to coax a lot of this around the corner there, and now I can really build a little bit of a thread head here. And I don't think it's particularly important that we cover all that up, but for fly appeal, you can try to cover most of that. What ends up happening is you try to build this huge head up here on the front, your thread will end up sliding off the front of that, and you lose all your thread wraps, and then you have to undo it all, and it's a big pain. That works right there for me. I'll even, you know, at the most come in and just trim some of that off if I got some crazy hair sticking out the front. But that's the tying portion, and I do like to come in at this point and just cover up my work here with this Solares bone dry. Let that soak in real nice, and then we'll cure this up. Okay. So, not looking like a crane fly right now. That's okay. What we're going to do now is a lot of these fibers are trapped in here. We want to get this to the point where everything is sticking out from the fly, so it's really easy to trim. My favorite dubbing brush is this makeshift one right here. It's kind of what I've always used. If you just cut your bristles at an angle, it gives you the soft portion and the stiff portion for brushing this all out, right? Sure, I'll get yelled at for promoting the toothbrush dubbing brush, but so we want to just kind of pick all this out, make sure nothing's trapped. Get to this point here. So I like to take about half the fibers that are from about the midpoint up and coax them upward. The bottom half coax down. We're going to come in here and just do one big trim. Same thing with the tail. This gets a little bit challenging. Trim that off. And we'll do the same thing on the bottom. Okay. Now, I used to get pretty obsessive with my trim work here, wanting this thing to look perfect. Hate to break it to you, the trout don't care at all. It might even be that the uglier your trim work is, the better this fly fishes. So I usually don't spend a ton of time here, but we just want maybe a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch in hair length there. Give it a round profile. Work your way down the tail. And then I'll usually cut the tail to a tapered tip. Hit this with the brush again. Rotary vise helps out a lot here. You can also just take this out and hold it in your hand. But that's about what we're going for there. And what's really cool about this fly, leaving this little bit of fur on here, when it gets wet, it really makes this thing look like that gelatinous texture that a crane fly actually has. Almost like it's like a glow around it, right? But still offering really good segmentation. I have never, ever, ever had one of these fall apart on me. It's an incredibly durable fly. The material doesn't fall apart. As long as you super glue both ends, it doesn't really come unraveled. Like I said, it's basically indestructible almost, you know, which is what kind of the theme behind a lot of my patterns, right? I don't want to have to go through 30 different flies in a day on a trip. I'd rather just go through one and put it back in my box. This is kind of one of those that fits the bill. So as this is drifting through the current, This tail gives really good motion. Almost looks like a crane fly that's just kind of in dead drift and is trying to find his way. This profile, the segmentation, that movement, I don't know what it is about this thing, but absolutely knocks the socks off the fish, especially anytime there's been a bump in flows, anytime that, we've all been, you go to Deckers and, oh man, they bumped it up to 400. I don't care if it's 6 inches of visibility. I'm running 2 of these things and they chomp it. Don't be afraid to time big. Like I said, this is a size 6, probably the size I do it in the most. If you want to add a tungsten bead to it, you can. Angler's Covey, actually, I tied this for the Angler's Covey YouTube channel and used a tungsten bead on that one. So if you want to see really the process with using a tungsten bead, you can head over to our YouTube channel and see that video there. But that's the Philly cheese crane. Really, really, really simple. Like I said, I think the longest part of this fly is just doing the trim work. But this is an absolute staple in my box. If you've been on a guided trip with me, there's a really high chance you caught a fish on this fly. It's one that's on my rig a lot. So that's it. Yes, sir. Good question. So the question was if I've ever done lead wire wraps as an underbody to add weight to it. The answer is yes. I've kind of played around with lead wire and tungsten bead. When I add a bead to this fly, I'm usually using a slotted tungsten bead. Even though this isn't a jig hook, if you tie in the slotted tungsten bead and just wrap it forward all the way it would normally sit on a jig hook, it still makes this ride hook point up. And I find that it snags up way less using that method of adding weight to it than using lead wire. Lead wire certainly gets it down, but it's going to hang up a lot more. And I don't like changing flies out and losing gears. So I've kind of shied away from the lead wire, just for that reason. Any other questions on this pattern? Great. Well, how are we doing on time? Cool. All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Hello fellow anglers, I'm happy to introduce the next fly, which is one of my go-to during the summer months on still waters and rivers alike, and that is the candy shop calabatus. Calabatus are incredibly unique as a food supply. When they land on the surface, it's common that they're still. Just like the Chevy commercial, they're like a rock, they don't move. The trout really do key in on them. And the reason I named it the candy shop calabatus is the trout love them so much, it's like a kid in a candy store. Simply cannot say no. So let's dive into this pattern, the make and design. I hope it brings you success this year. The hook we're going to use for the candy shop calabatus is the TMC 100 dry fly hook with a down eye. Very strong and durable hook. I'll usually use this in a size 16. You can also go down to a size 18. The thread is going to be 8/0 uni thread. This is rusty dun. For the tail, we're going to use micro fibbits. We're also going to use these in a rusty dun coloration. My favorite material for the body is going to be the Biot Quills Calabatus color. And a Calabatus color is tan with a little hint of gray tone mixed in. You can also tie this in entirely gray body. The wings are also another secret weapon. It's going to be 1/8 gray scud backing. And I used to use plastic for the wings, and I realized with the suppleness and using scud backing, it doesn't twist or spin the dry fly, and it really does give it that transparent look and a silhouette that the trout can identify as a non-escaping food supply. Behind and in front of the wings, we're going to use grizzly, hackle, Mets, and we'll use ginger barred hackle, Mets. And then we're also going to adhere this fly numerous steps using Loctite super glue. And then for the post, I'm going to use orange egg yarn. I'll cut it in a strip about 2 inches, and I place it right in the middle of tan or gray poly yarn, webbing, wing material, anything that represents that tuft. That's what we're trying to match. Yarn's a classic material used for this. So to start things out, behind the eye of the hook, I'm going to use the tag end of that rusty dun. I'm going to wrap the thread away from my body, from behind the eye, moving back towards the bend. And again, using that tag end of thread, I'm going to lift it up at an angle, and that's my ramp to build up a nice even body, moving all the way back towards the bend. Doesn't have to be perfect, but symmetrical, even wraps to make sure that you're covering the hook shank. It makes it easier also to apply materials. So I'll stop behind the hook point. I'll break this now. Sometimes you break it and there's a tag left over. I like to break it because it looks cool, but I warn you, in looking cool, there's a chance this could all fall apart. You have to start over. And at this point when we stop, I'm going to twist the thread about 20 or 30 times, and I'm going to build up a bump. I'm going to go over the same spot about 3 to 4 times, and this is where I'm going to place the microfibbits for the tail. When applying the microfibbits for the tail, I'm going to measure these out to be about 2 times the length of the shank of the hook, extending off the back. I want them to be fairly long, and I'm going to place them at an angle on my side on top of the hook shank, and then perform 1 loose wrap. When I do a loose wrap here, all I'm trying to do is capture the material, lift it up, and have it be placed directly on the back of the fly. And I'll move back towards that bump we build up at the bend. Make sure that these elevate up a little bit taller. 1 more wrap there. And then we'll have them separated so that we can move through with the quill body as well. Now, when we deal with biots and quill bodies, we want to make sure that we get them wet. They're easier to apply into the hook shank. And I'll cut the tip off. That way I'm dealing with a lot of segmentation to start when I wrap this against. So I'm going to roll that over the quill body, move that forward with loose wraps moving towards the eye of the hook. And I'll stop about 3 eye lengths behind the eye of the hook, and I'm going to cut that tag in close. Then I'm going to grab this material, split the tails, bring it up around one end, and then wrap that forward towards the eye of the hook, trying to get nice even segmentation for the body. And the goal here is just to split the tails. That's what we want to represent, which is what we see on the naturals. And I'm using the pinch method, thumb and middle finger, moving all the way up towards the eye, eventually stopping about 3 lengths behind. And I just build up that nice, beautiful quill body. I'll do 2 loose wraps, switch over to the dominant hand and secure wrap twice, cut that tag in close, make an adjustment to the tails as I see fit. Again, lift them both up. And at this point in the tie, I like to come in with a piece of small wire, and I'm going to dip that in the moist Loctite super glue, and I like to just place 1 drop of that right underneath and behind on the tail. That helps secure this fly and makes it incredibly durable. So the split tails represent what we see in the naturals, but then when that dries, and we'll even do 1 more drop, just want to make sure that that quill is incredibly strong on the back end of the fly. Now we're done here, and we've got that Loctite super glue in place, and we got the tail split up high. We're going to build a thread base moving towards the eye of the hook, and then coming back again towards the bend. And then this is the stage where we're going to apply the wings. All right, when we're using the 1/8 scud back, we're going to use about 1 inch in length, and I'm going to bend this around the thread, elevate the thread up, and then wrap it around the opposite side of the hook shank. And this will separate it on top. Then I'll grab a tag end, bring it up towards my body, grab the opposite tag end and pull it away, and then wrap it down. And you can see when we secure that, we have a nice figure 8 look and make an adjustment to those. When those are sticking to the side, that represents the wings that we would see for Calabatus. And again, when they're flat on the surface, it does look like the natural food supply. I'll then wrap around these 2 or 3 times, securing them down. We don't have to make them too tight with thread because we're going to come back and glue in the post. But that's going to be exactly what we're trying to do to match the wings of the calabatus. Now at this point, we're also going to come in and build the post. And again, for the post, we have egg yarn sandwiched like a hot dog in between the bun, between the poly yarn. What I'm going to do, just like we did with the wings, is I'm going to bend this around the thread, and I'm going to elevate the thread straight up. Before I do that though, the secret to this step is I'm going to dip that wire into Loctite super glue, and I'm going to rub that right on top of the bottom of that post. And then when I elevate the thread up, I'll slide this down, and that post is going to sit right between the wings. And you can see what we've done there is we've developed a nice, awesome post glued in, which brings this to life. And it gives you a great sighter when you're dealing with a lot of rising fish. So give that a second to dry. And I'll oftentimes come back and grab some water, get that moist. It makes it a little bit easier to manage and deal with it. And the cool thing is you can see this from a mile away. The challenge with candy shops, calabatus, is matching the size. But the advantage to this is in comparison to the natural or other dry flies on the market is you can see it. Calabatus hatches get so large at times you can lose your fly in a sea of naturals, which is awesome, but it's also very frustrating to the angler. So this is going to solve that problem for us. Okay, once we get that in place, I'll grab the tag ends of the Metz hackle, and we can see there's going to be a curvature to these, so we want that curvature facing back towards the bend, just like with the ostrich we use on the Mini Leech Jig series, and we want that to flare out even. So I'm going to place this right behind the wings, and I'm going to do a couple loose wraps, making sure it's in place where I want it, and then secure wrap twice. And you have to work around that bulb of hackle and that bulb of yarn. So we have one in place. We're going to come back and do that with grizzly as well, right behind that ball. And I like using brown and grizzly because it gives that mix match color of the legs. It really does allow the fish to identify. I'll then bring the thread forward around the wings, wrapping all the way up towards the eye. And again, getting a little bit more moisture will make sure that that poly yarn and the egg yarn is going to stand up nice and tall when it's moist. I'll then grab the ginger hackle, and I'll do one wrap, come forward towards the wing, do a second wrap towards the wing, come up underneath the wing, and then do two more wraps towards the eye of the hook. Lift that tag end up and do one loose wrap, second loose wrap, and then secure wrap. And we'll do the same with the grizzly. Move forward with the grizzly. We're going to do one in between the brown wraps, and the second one moving forward. We're going to bring that underneath the wing and do the same on the front. One wrap and a second wrap. Lift that tag end up, loose wrap twice, and then secure wrap twice. You can see what we've designed is just a really cool body with the wings flared out to the side, that candy shop post on top. Grab the scissors and cut that tag end flush right against the eye of the hook. And you'll have some extending on the back and the front. We can cut those as need be, clean it up as much as possible. And then I'll come back and just secure wrap behind the eye, try to clean it up the best that I can. Then we'll grab the whip finish tool. And again, the whip finish, we're gonna pinch on the ball. Using the extended metal part of the tool, I'm going to hook the thread, elevate the thread up, and while I do that, allow it to rotate and spin my finger off the ball to the post, and I'll do one secure wrap, second secure wrap, lift it up, pull it down. Any stragglers at this point, I'll cut those relatively close, try to clean up the eye a little bit, and I'll do a second whip finish here. Make it as clean as possible behind the eye, lift it up, secure it down. You want to be careful to not crowd the eye too much. Ensure that you get that effective look. And then lastly, when we're done tying in the eye of the hook, we're going to come back and make our adjustments. First thing we're going to do is we're going to grab that post, and I'm going to cut that fairly short. I want that about, I'd say, 1/4 of an inch above the hackle base on the body. I'm going to cut that. You can see how it just flares out to the side. And right in the middle is the orange. And then as far as the wings are concerned, I'm going to grab the scissors for the wings, and I'm going to cut the wings at an angle to make them look as natural as possible. There's one wing there. I'll do the same on the other side. Cut that wing the best I can at an angle. Match up the distance and length. And there we have the Candy Shop Calabatus. Awesome dry fly. You can see when it rotates and spins, it looks like the natural Calabatus. The other thing you can do when you're fishing this pattern, if you feel like it needs to ride lower in the film, you can cut the hackle on the bottom and extend. So when you do that, it's going to ride lower in the film, or you can leave them, which I normally do when I'm tying the fly, to where I have that hackle post and the base on the body. And there we have the final product, the Candy Shop Calabatus. Lastly, if you want to, you can come back and bar the wings with a Copic marker. I used to do that quite a bit in the past. Now I'll leave the wings extended out to the side, and depending on what the naturals look like, I may or may not do that. But you can see how supple those wings really are. Gives it that nice, even, and traditional look.
Hey everybody, I'm the closer, I suppose. My name is John Easdon. I work here at Anglers Covey, and I'm super excited to tie one of my signature patterns that just came out with Umpqua today. Actually, I'm going to tie two. I'm going to start with what's called the blindside midge. The blindside midge is a fly that's near and dear to my heart and a lot of our guides and people that have been around here for a while. It's been a really constant producer for me. It's available in 3 colors. It's available in black, gray, and purple. I'm going to tie the purple one today. It's a little more visually appealing, so we'll get started right in with it. A little bit of history with this fly is I created this fly quite a number of years ago to specifically fool technical tailwater trout. What I saw was there was really kind of a gap in my mind in some emerging midge patterns. So I got busy at the vise, and actually this was only the second modification that I ever made on this fly, and it's been the current one I've been fishing for quite a long time now. It's a very simple fly. It is a guide fly, not many materials, very easy to tie. But again, if you don't fish a fly like this, I definitely encourage you to check out the blindside midge. It will be a sure producer for you no matter where you're at. So I'm going to start with the TMC 2488. I'm going to tie this in an 18 today. And I'm going to use a 2mm black tungsten bead. And again, this is a really pretty simple fly to put together here. I'm going to start with some UTC 70 in purple. And really starting this fly out, I'm just going to lay some wraps right behind that bead, get some secure that bead up a little bit. Second material that I'm going to use in this fly is some UTC ultra small black wire. You can use small as well, and it'll actually segment that ribbing out a little more. It'll make it look a little more buggy. But I'm simply just going to tie this in. And I'm running that wire on my side of the hook to try to hide it a little bit. And I'm going to go down that hook bend a little bit. Even wraps, make a really smooth profile here on this fly. Back up to the bead. I'm going to take my wire. You can use the rotary system on your vise if you have a rotary vise. I usually just spin it with my hands. I'm going to trade off these wraps underneath the fly here and just get some good segmentation going. When I get up to that bead, I'm going to do a loose wrap on that wire right behind the bead, and then I'll do 2 wraps right in front of the wire. Helicopter that wire off there. Throw a couple more secure wraps there. And this is kind of one of the 2 tricks of the blindside midge. This ice dub pink. I don't know what it is about this color, but it seems to really grab a lot of light in the water. It's kind of a beacon for the fly. And when I complete the fly here, you'll see how it kind of, the hackle, the ostrich kind of envelopes over that thorax and makes it look really super buggy. And a little tip here with this ice dub is less is more. So I always pull, I don't know if you can see at the top of the package, I'm just going to pull out a very little bit and a tiny little pinch there. I like to have a little cup of water next to my tying area, and I can actually dip my fingers in that water. If you have some moisture on your fingers, that ice dub actually binds in that dubbing noodle a lot easier to the thread. And I'm going to do some pretty tight noodles here. I want to really compact that ice dub down. You don't want a lot here. It's kind of less is more again. And I'm just going to actually wrap this right behind the bead. I want about a hook width gap between the bead and this thorax. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a space where I can put that collar. And for my collar, I'm going to use some ostrich in the gray colorway here. And ostrich is a great material. A lot of tyers like this. I really love it. I use it for a lot of different things. But when you're picking out your ostrich, you want to make sure that you kind of hand pick it out. All the ostrich plumes are different. Some of them have very thin feathers, which are really good for size 22s, 24s, something like that. And the bigger plumes with the wider feathers are really good for your 16s, 18s, and even some 20s there. So you want to do a good job of picking out that ostrich plume. It'll pay you huge dividends down the road. I'm going to take a feather with some good little spreads on this here, and I'm going to cut off a little bit of the bottom here, strip away some of that ostrich so I have a little point. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to line the spine. If you look at an ostrich feather, it's kind of concave. So I want the convex side facing me. I'm just going to stick that little point right behind the bead. Do a loose wrap, 2 loose wraps, 3, catch it. Then I actually like to move that feather towards the eye of the hook and do 1 wrap, 2 wraps behind it. So it kind of saddles it in there. Now from here, I'm going to just use my hands again. I'm not going to use the rotary function. I'm going to come under the hook and wrap towards me 2 times. And that's really all I need there. And the reason why you do that kind of X wrap in that ostrich, that second part of that, is it puts your thread in front of the ostrich hurl. So now when I come up to capture this, it doesn't crush it. It doesn't collapse it. I can do 1 loose wrap there to capture that ostrich. And then I'll do a couple wraps in front of it. And usually you can get your fingers real close and just kind of pop the rest of that hurl off. And then in finishing this fly, I like to actually push the ostrich back towards the bend of the hook. And I'm going to do probably 3 secure wraps. And then just a simple whip finish. So again, it's a pretty basic tie. You can really crank these out. And I'm not going to really worry if any of this feather is kind of shooting out all over the place. You don't really need to worry about trimming it or anything. Again, when this gets wet, it looks super buggy. And in fact, I'll just take a minute to use some water here. Just get it wet. So you can see how that ostrich hurl kind of envelops that thorax. The ostrich hurl undulates in the water. It's super buggy, and again, the fish really can't refuse it. This fly is the sizes I like to tie this fly in are 18s, 20s, and 22s. I do tie them in 24s occasionally, and if I do a 24, I'm not going to use a bead. It's just you can't really get a bead in the proper hook gap with a size 24 hook. But again, this fly is available in purple, gray, and black in size 18, 20, and 22. If you haven't fished this, you definitely need to. Super easy tie and very effective. Any questions on the blindside midge? Who's fished it? Love it. Yeah, very simple. I think the biggest thing with this, and what I hear a lot of people have trouble with, is the ice dub. And dubbing in general, you want to use a very, very small amount. It's always easier to add a little bit more than take it away, especially this really coarse dubbing. So you don't need to go completely nuts with a ton of dubbing on this fly. So, fly number 2. In my opinion, I think one of the most overlooked fly patterns or bugs to imitate out there are scuds. Here locally in the South Platte River and all of our still waters, we have a lot of scuds. Most high lakes are teeming with scuds. And some of those lakes, it's really the only food source. So scuds are often overlooked. You could go into any of the major sections of the South Platte River and fish scuds year round. This is a scud pattern that I developed a little while ago. And it's actually tied on a jig style hook. So it rides hook point up. And it is called the Slapshot Scud. I may like hockey a little bit, hence the name. So the Slapshot Scud, again, it's kind of the first of its kind commercially that rides hook point up. Again, this is a fly that you can fish in any moving water, any still water, and it's been very effective for me and a lot of my other colleagues and friends. So it's a super fun tie to fly. I think anytime you're using these materials, it's fun. Again, this is another guide fly, so you can crank these out fairly quickly. So I'm going to start actually with the Umpqua XT500 jig hook. I'm going to tie this in a size 14 today. This will be nice and easy to see. And the bead I'm using on here is an Umpqua orange radiant bead in a 2.4 millimeter. And I'll explain this a little further as we move through this fly, but I like to use wax thread on this fly. And for this orange the orange version that we're doing today, I'm going to use this fluorescent orange UTC wax thread. Really super simple to start. I'm just going to start some thread right behind that bead. I'm going to kind of get it locked in, go back and forth. The thing with this fly is anything that I do here on the hook shank is going to be covered. You can load it up with thread if you want to. You can keep it super bare bones if you want to. There's really no rules. But I'm going to work this thread even wraps. Whoa. Anybody ever broke thread? Me neither. I actually haven't broke thread on this fly in a really long time. My apologies. We have this bobbin threader from 1946 too that's a little hard to deal with. So I apologize, everybody. Someone asked in our Q&A earlier if we ever wrap our thread backwards. This is where I would wrap my thread backwards. And I'm just going to start all over and get this all off here. Again, so sorry, everybody. All right, now we're in the game here. So again, I'm just going to catch back up. I'm going to wrap this thread back to the back of the hook shank here. I don't really want to go down the bend of the hook, just because this hook does ride, or this pattern rides hook point up. I don't want to put the arch of this scud going the other way. So I'm going to finish with my thread in the back of the hook here, right at the bend of the hook. The next material is going to be, you guessed it, ostrich. I might like this stuff. And again, you want to look for the proper size feathers for the size flies that you are tying. These are some really big feathers. It's perfect for these size 14, 16, stuff like that. I'm not really going to be too worried about big feathers on this pattern because the scud, I really want this to be bushy and really kind of be pronounced. A lot of material in here. And again, the dye batches of all this stuff really vary. So if you're going for a certain colorway, you might have to look around a little bit for a certain dye batch that you're looking for. I haven't been able to find this particular orange in quite a while, so this is one of my favorites right here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take off a feather. Pretty beastie feather there. And again, ostrich feathers are kind of concave, and I want the spine facing me. I'm going to tie this right on to the very back of the shank here. And again, I don't care about trimming any of that stuff off. I just want to make sure that this ostrich herl is nice and seated in there. Next thing is dubbing, and I like this orange ice dub, and I also like this sow scud dubbing. Whoops. You can use any blends here, get creative with it. What I like to do here is evenly mix both of these types of dubbing here. And how I do that, you can mix it beforehand, or you can mix it at the vise. I kind of just do it at the vise. But I like to pull a little bit of material out from each pack here, almost equal parts. And then as I pinch the tops of the packages here, I can kind of cut it off. I can pull out just enough, however much I want here. With my fingers, I can mix it a little bit. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time mixing this dubbing. I just want a good mix of both of these different types of dubbing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to form a dubbing noodle. And when you mix these two types of dubbing, it's hard to get a really thick noodle or a really tight noodle. And that's okay. You want this kind of sparse. It's going to be easier to tease out when we get into forming the scud here. But a little noodle that looks something like that is what I'm going for. And I'm going to start just wrapping this right at the back of that hook, right where that ostrich is anchored in. Even wraps clear up to the bead. I do some secure wraps, quite a few secure wraps right behind that bead. And actually, at this stage of the game, you can either half hitch or do a whip finish here, but I want to anchor this thread. And the reason being is we kind of go to town teasing this fly out to make it look like a scud. And if you don't throw a half hitch or a whip finish there, it's inevitable. It's going to pop off and you're going to have to start over. So it's just kind of a pain. At this stage of the game, I'm actually going to turn this fly upside down. I'm digging the way this is looking here. I'm going to take a pretty coarse dubbing brush. This is actually a metal dubbing brush. And I'm going to start teasing the dubbing downward. So this way, it'd be the top of the fly, I guess, if you were looking at it normally. And how I like to do this is I like to put my finger against the fly when I start to tease this down. And the reason I do that kind of keeps all the dubbing uniform, and you can see how that scud shape starts to form. Did a couple on this side, so you can switch sides, and doing this pretty aggressively here. That's one of the reasons I like that wax thread too. If I do hit it, generally it's not going to break. You can see I'm getting a nice smooth kind of back there on the inside of this hook. And I can tease this out to my heart's desire. A little bit, a lot. But I'm pretty happy with how that's coming along so far. I'm going to turn this fly back around right side up. Now I'm actually going to start wrapping this ostrich hurl. I'm going to start right on the back, like right on top of where I tied that in. That's where my first wrap is going to be. And I'm going to do even segmented wraps all throughout this fly, going clear up to the back of the bead. So on this 14, I want about 5 to 6 little segments in there. I'm going to end right behind the bead. I'm going to do a loose wrap, another loose wrap. I'm going to move that ostrich back and do a couple tightening wraps, maybe 4 or 5 tightening wraps to cut off that ostrich hurl. So it looks super messy right now. That's how it's supposed to look. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and come in and just whip finish this fly right now. If you want, you can use a little bit of super glue on here to secure it. I usually don't. This is a pretty tough fly. So it's got some hard bristles and some softer bristles. It's softer than my metal dubbing brush. But I'm going to come in here with this. I'm going to turn this fly back upside down. Again, I'm going to put my finger against the fly and tease this down. You can see how that ostrich just kind of moves right into the rest of that fly. It gives them some really cool segmentation. Can you guys see that? So as opposed to using wire and all that stuff, I kind of want to just keep this nice and clean. And then my little cup of water. I want to get some moisture on my fingers to finish this fly out. And I want to be careful not to touch the inside of the hook there, but I want moist hands to kind of come down. You can really see that segmentation start to show up there. And I'm just touching the sides of the fly, trying to get it to lay down. One of the keys here, and I believe, is to keep this fly really uniform in the back. So when I finish it here, it maintains the same shape. And the next thing we're going to use is I'm going to use some any thin UV. You can use some thick too if you'd like. But when I start to use the UV on this fly, I'm actually going to turn my UV lamp on first. I'm going to hit this with just a very little bit of UV. And with this thin UV, it can soak the fly if you leave it sitting there too long before you cure it. So really, I'm trying to just get some little tiny dabs of this UV on this fly, and I'm going to hit it right away with the light. And then I can kind of build that up to get the desired shape that I want on the inside of this hook. So let's start here and just kind of dab a little. As soon as I get some, I'm going to hit it with the light. Go to the back of the fly and do the same thing. And I can usually try to get a little bit right in the middle just to maintain that kind of arch shape of a scud. Now I can take my softer brush and tease this out if I want to, just again to get my desired shape. But I'm really digging how this is looking. Now what I want to do is kind of form the bottom of the scud, so all the legs of the scud. Again, this fly will trip you out because you're tying it upside down. So it'll take you a little bit to get in the swing of things to trimming this like this. And this size 14, this is a size that I would use in still water. So I want to keep these legs fairly long. I want to keep this nice and bushy. I'm a big proponent of keeping scissors in my pack when I'm fishing. If I need to trim something on the water, I can. But if I over tie it, it's big and bushy in the beginning, then I got a lot to work with there. This is the slap shot scud. This is available in 3 colors with Umpqua Feather Merchants in size 14, 16, and 18. In orange, which is the dead scud, olive, which is the live scud, and gray, which is the purgatory scud. But I really like this pattern. It's a fun pattern to fish. One of the things with this, if I tie this with an improved clinch knot in still water, it'll ride dead level just like this in the water. So if I'm fishing an indicator rig, this will stay in the water just like this. The other thing I like to do is I like to strip a lot of flies in still water, and I'll do a loop knot on this, and it gives it some really good swimming action in the water. But again, it's a pretty simple fly to tie, very effective. Urge you all definitely to try this one. Any questions on the slap shot? Yes. I like hockey a little bit. Just a little bit. So yeah, slap shot. Actually, it was in a conversation with Jeff from Umpqua, so it was kind of funny. It came out of nowhere, and I love it. So yeah, look for some hockey themed flies. I think I'm just gonna ride that out. Colorado Avalanche. If anybody is out there listening, I'll take a sponsorship, no problem. So we can do some ballerina flies, whatever you want to do. Any other question? Yes. Love to tie it without a bead. For the kind of old school version is just on a scud hook. I love the 2457. And you can tie this same exact pattern just like I tied it on a regular scud hook. Yep. Well, thank you guys. I want to thank everybody in the shop and out there on YouTube for joining us today at Anglers Covey for the Umpqua Signature Fly Tying Tour. This was a blast. We had a great lineup today, a lot of talent. Thank you, Umpqua, for just being class acts and doing this whole thing right. And I urge you, if you've never been into the shop, definitely come down. We have about an 8,000 square foot shop here. It's big enough you could cast a fly rod in here, although you might get yelled at if you do. But yeah, definitely, we're all about helping people out no matter what level of fly tying or fly fishing they're in. Come into the shop, hit us up on social media. We're more than happy to help you and answer your questions. Thanks for joining us today, everybody.